Hello, and welcome to this clean historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. The Bride's New Beginning by Martha Gillcrest, Chapter 1, Wilmington, Delaware, 1879. Rachel Campbell was surprised to hear the sound of muffled crying as she approached the parlor. When she had lit the fire an hour ago, her mistress had seemed in good spirits, and she wondered what had changed. She nudged the door open and hurried in with her tray of coffee and poppy seed cake. "What is it?" she asked, full of concern. Sarah Blair dabbed a lace handkerchief at her tear-stained cheeks and gave Rachel a watery smile. "Why has everything gone so wrong?" She sighed disconsolately and reached for the cake to comfort herself. "I thought you said you enjoyed the dance last night?" "I wasn't being completely honest about that," Sarah replied. She gestured for her maid to sit down in the chair on the other side of the crackling fire in the hearth. "I guess I was nursing my bruised pride." "You mean Mr. Ritter wasn't as attentive as you'd hoped he would be?" Rachel hadn't warmed to the man who had been calling on Sarah lately. There was something about his shifty demeanor and the way he fingered the silver ornaments that made him seem untrustworthy. "I was convinced our courtship was going well. I only wish I could ask Mama." Sarah's face clouded again, and Rachel's heart squeezed in sympathy for her. Mr. and Mrs. Blair had both died in quick succession at the beginning of the previous year, leaving Sarah alone in the large family home, other than the servants. There were no other close relations she could turn to for advice, and Rachel knew Sarah missed her ma worse than ever now that she was navigating matters of the heart and trying to secure a good marriage for herself. "After being so friendly these last few months, Jeffrey barely spoke to me last night," Sarah explained, sounding forlorn. "He said it was because he had to talk to his business associates, but it was embarrassing having to sit out so many dances. Perhaps he'll make it up to you with an evening at the theater soon." Rachel felt aggrieved for her mistress. She could imagine how Jeffrey's behavior would have set tongues wagging with the other guests at the charity ball. Sarah had been hoping Jeffrey would propose, but this didn't bode well. "Do you think he's having a change of heart?" There was a note of panic in Sarah's voice, and she blinked back her tears again as she sipped her coffee. Rachel shrugged, feeling helpless about how to advise her. "I wish I knew what to say," she replied softly. "When I married Lester, it was all very straightforward because we'd known each other for years. We always just assumed we would get wed." She felt the familiar ache of grief that always came when she mentioned her late husband. He had died in an explosion at the gunpowder mill where he worked, just after their daughter, Kendra, was born. After almost 4 years, she had gotten used to the fact that she became a widow before the age of 20 and had long since given up thinking anyone would take Lester's place in her affections. But Sarah was almost 24 and was worried that if she didn't marry soon, she would remain a spinster. "I just wish I understood why he behaved so differently. It was almost as though he was annoyed with me, as though I'd disappointed him somehow." "Maybe it's something to do with his business, and you're reading too much into it." Rachel rose from her seat. Even though she had been Sarah's maid for so long that her mistress treated her more like a friend, she was always careful to remember her place. "I'm going to help cook with lunch." "Is there anything else you need, ma'am?" Sarah waved her away. "No, thank you, Rachel, and I've told you, call me Sarah. I know Mama discouraged it, but she's not here anymore." Rachel thought about Sarah's predicament as she bustled toward the kitchen. Jeffrey Ritter had recently started his own business making carriages, and Mr. Blair had also had a carriage-making business, which was now being run by the manager since it had been left to Sarah. "It must be fate," Sarah said when she confided every detail of the blossoming courtship with Rachel. Rachel didn't like to think the worst of people, but it did seem like a remarkable coincidence. Although she had never said as much to Sarah, part of her wondered whether Jeffrey was only interested in her inheritance. "Look, Ma," cook is letting me help bake some bread." Rachel's heart lifted as she saw her daughter, Kendra, standing on a chair kneading dough. She had flour smudged on her snub nose, and she grinned, holding up her dough-covered fingers like two starfish. "Are you sure she's not getting in your way, Mrs. Foley?" The cook turned around from where she was stirring the bubbling pan of soup on the range, her face pink from the heat. "Not at all. I like having her here, you know that. Ain't no need for you to ask every day." Rachel shot the old woman a smile of gratitude. Rachel had left the Blairs' service when she married. But when Lester died and she had faced being homeless and penniless, Sarah had pleaded for her ma to take her back as their maid to help her out. Although Kendra was as good as gold, she often felt a pang of guilt that she might get in everyone's way. "It keeps our spirits up, having a little one in the house," Mrs. Foley declared. "And it's good for Miss Sarah, stops her from getting too downhearted since her parents died." "Mr. Ritter didn't behave in a very gentlemanly way last night," Rachel told her. The cook rolled her eyes and didn't seem surprised. "He'd better not upset her," Mrs. Foley muttered with a frown. She was rather protective of her mistress and didn't like the way Jeffrey spoke over her, as though Sarah's opinions were of no consequence. A sudden banging at the front door made Rachel jump. "Are we expecting guests? Maybe it's Mr. Ritter come to apologize." "Chance would be a fine thing." Mrs. Foley dropped the dough into a bowl and thumped it for good measure to underline her feelings. "He's far too full of himself to think he's done anything wrong." Rachel opened the door and bobbed a curtsy to Mr. Parsons, the Blair family's lawyer, who was standing outside looking impatient. A brisk winter wind was blowing along the street, which made his shapeless black coat flap around him, and he reminded her of a crow with his piercing dark eyes and beady gaze. She bobbed her head again, feeling slightly nervous. "Good morning, sir. Miss Blair isn't expecting me, but I have some business I need to discuss with her." He took his hat off to reveal thinning gray hair and handed it to Rachel, not waiting for her to invite him in. His expression was serious as his cane tapped on the ornate tiled floor. "In the parlor? I'll tell her you're here." Rachel darted past him. The last thing Sarah would want was for him to find her in tears about Jeffrey, but thankfully she had recovered her composure and was reading a book by the window. Sarah's face was puzzled as she invited Mr. Parsons to sit by the fire. The man her papa had entrusted to manage Blair's carriages was doing a good job as far as she knew, and there was more than enough money coming in to cover the household costs, so there was no reason for the lawyer to pay her a visit. Rachel hurried back with fresh coffee and discreetly poured it into a fine bone china cup for Mr. Parsons, as well as handing a fresh cup to Sarah. "You don't need to wait for Rachel to leave," Sarah said, giving the lawyer a pleasant smile. "She's practically like a sister to me, so I don't mind if she overhears what you have to say." The lawyer took a sip of his coffee and gave a disapproving sniff. He didn't agree with such overfamiliarity, but it wasn't his place to say. "As you wish. Your father always liked to review the business once a year, and I have taken it upon myself to continue the tradition, Miss Blair." He pulled some papers from his leather case and carefully opened them before placing wire-rimmed spectacles on his nose. Rachel could see Sarah's eyes glazing over with boredom already. "I'm sure everything is in hand," Sarah replied. "Mr. Campbell, the manager, told me the business is going well, and the workers aren't pressing for more pay. They're very loyal to Papa, even though he's sadly no longer here." Mr. Parsons cleared his throat and rustled the papers, flicking through them before shaking his head. "I'm afraid Mr. Campbell is not qualified to make such comments, my dear. He might be good at building carriages, but he has a woeful grasp of how a business should be run." "Are you telling me there are problems?" Sarah leaned forward, paying better attention. "Do I need to find a new manager?" "It's worse than that." Mr. Parsons glanced in Rachel's direction again, then lowered his voice. "He has made some very poor decisions. Added to that, the business was not doing as well as your papa might have led you to believe before he died." "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I'm still not sure what you mean." Sarah's pretty brow was furrowed with a frown. "Why would Mr. Campbell lie to me? It turns out that he's been cutting corners, buying wood from cheaper suppliers, and using inferior leather. Customers have been canceling orders, and he forged the accounts to try and cover it up. I only found out about it through rumors in my circle of acquaintances. How bad is it? Sarah jumped up and started pacing back and forth. Surely a new manager could turn things around if I do something quickly. What about Jeffrey? He might be able to help you sort this mess out, Rachel suggested. Sarah looked relieved. Of course. She smiled at Mr. Parsons. Jeffrey Ritter and I are courting. I expect he'll be asking for my hand in marriage any day now. He also has a carriage-making business, so he will know what to do to save Blair's carriages. In fact, it's the perfect solution. Mr. Parsons coughed again, suddenly looking rather guilty. I had heard that Mr. Ritter was walking out with you, Sarah. Your papa asked me to keep an eye on such things, from a discreet distance, of course. Then you'll know there's no need to worry unduly. Jeffrey will help me find a new manager, and we can soon get our old customers back again. It's not that simple. Mr. Parsons' cheeks turned red. It seems that many of the customers who have been loyal to your family's business all these years are now dealing with Jeffrey instead. Sarah's mouth gaped open. You mean he's stolen our customers? On purpose? That low down. Rachel bit back what she wanted to say, even though he deserved it. I can't believe it. That must be why he was behaving so strangely toward you last night. He's taken advantage of your kind heart to grow his own business. I'm afraid your maid is right, Sarah, Mr. Parsons said with a sorrowful nod. That's not the end of it, though. I discovered that Jeffrey was bribing Mr. Campbell to use shoddy materials so he could gain customers at your expense. Blair's Carriages is now so badly in debt that it's practically worthless. All we can hope is that the workers are able to find jobs elsewhere. I've been a complete fool. And I feel as though I've let Papa and Mama down as well. You mustn't think that, Rachel said hastily. She put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. Jeffrey used charm to deceive you, but it's not your fault. You weren't to know what he's really like. I was convinced he was going to propose to me. Sarah looked at Mr. Parsons with a worried frown. What about the house? I could sell the house and move somewhere smaller, couldn't I? Mr. Parsons looked even more apologetic. I'm afraid your papa never owned this house, Sarah. I thought you knew that? By the time you've paid off the business debts, there will be enough money left to pay for a few months' rent. But after that, you'll have to look for employment, I'm afraid. Sarah's face paled as she looked between Rachel and the lawyer. I've never had to work. Mama always said I would marry well and never have to worry about such things. What will I do? We'll manage, Rachel said stoutly. Think of all those books you read. You can become a teacher, perhaps. I'll see myself out. Parsons rose stiffly and put his hat on again. I'm sorry to have brought this bad news to you. Your father was always a good client, and as for Jeffrey Ritter, I think you might have had a lucky escape. He's a slippery character. Good day to you. He put his hat back on, and the sound of his cane tapping on the floor receded as he let himself out. We're ruined, Rachel. Ruined. Sarah burst into noisy tears. Hush now, we'll think of something, I promise. Rachel squared her shoulders, but Sarah looked unconvinced. Who will want to marry me once word gets out about what Jeffrey has done? Especially now that I'm practically penniless. I have to get away from here, Rachel. The shame of it all is too much. A thoughtful look came over Rachel's face. If that's the way you're thinking, what about becoming a mail-order bride? Cook keeps suggesting it for me, but it would feel disloyal to Lester. Apparently, it's quite common for young ladies to be heading west to find a handsome husband in the western frontier towns, and you have a few months to find a kind-hearted gentleman and correspond with him. Sarah's tears slowed, and she even managed a wry smile. I suppose Jeffrey just expects me to politely put up with his bad behavior, Rachel. But I'm not going to. Her voice trembled again. But she shook her head, determined not to cry again. If Jeffrey doesn't want me, it's his loss. I shall find myself a better husband instead. That'll show him, Rachel chuckled. Sarah was stronger than she gave herself credit for. I'll help you. You were very kind after Lester died, so it's the least I can do. Jeffrey doesn't deserve a moment more of your time. But are you really sure about being a mail-order bride? Traveling all that way to get married? Sarah hesitated, then grabbed Rachel's hands. I'll do it on one condition. Will you and Kendra come west with me? I don't think I have the courage to travel so far alone. You can still be my maid, and it will be a fresh start for you and Kendra, too. Not to get married, Rachel said hastily. I still love Lester, and Kendra doesn't need a new pa. She wasn't ready to give her heart to anyone else, but the idea of a new beginning as a lady's maid out west piqued her interest. Cook was always telling her it would be a nicer way for Kendra to grow up. Of course, Sarah replied, full of renewed enthusiasm. You shall travel with me, and that way we can start our new lives together. Mrs. Foley mentioned recently that she would like to go and live with her sister, so she won't feel bad about us leaving. She reached for her silk shawl. Come on, Rachel. We'll go to the matrimonial bureau together and see what I need to do next. Chapter 2. Rocky River, Wyoming. 1880. A cloud of breath plumed over the sturdy horse's head as it trotted along the track. Even though it would soon be spring, there was still snow lying thick on the ground, and the sun glinted off the icicles that adorned the bare trees on either side of the track. Daniel Roscoe lifted his collar against the wind and surveyed the rolling hills with narrowed eyes. There would be plenty of animals to trap out yonder if he had the inclination to make camp for the night and go hunting, but he decided not to. It was time to put those days behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, his rugged features lifted into a happy smile at the sight of the furs piled up in the back of his buckboard wagon. He had been fortunate to have a good winter's hunting, and he hoped to make a decent sum of money selling his goods when he reached Rocky River. As the first few buildings of the frontier town came into view, he pulled his wagon to a halt, feeling an unexpected mixture of emotions. Happiness at coming home, but also a lingering echo of heartache as he was reminded of what he'd lost. He jumped down from the wagon and walked around it under the pretext of checking that the furs were tied down properly. Who am I kidding, Rudy? I've got to face the past sooner or later. He rubbed his faithful horse's neck, and the animal snickered in response, nuzzling his pocket for some food. Let's get on and hope the busybodies aren't in town today. With a rueful grin, Daniel got back up onto the wooden seat and picked up the reins again. Let's go, boy. We're coming home. Daniel? Daniel Roscoe? Well, I'll be... Suzanne Perez paused from her task of beating rugs and ran to the wagon, which had just pulled up in front of the Rosebush Inn. I didn't know you were in town. Will you come inside and have something to eat? Eli was talking about you just the other day, wondering how life was treating you. It's good to see you, Suzanne. Daniel hitched the horse and gave her a hug before pulling his thick leather gloves off. A hot meal would be mighty fine. Thank you. He stood for a moment, looking down the street. The place probably looks a bit different, huh? Suzanne patted his arm. 5 years is a long time to be away and for things to change in a town like this. There are plenty of new businesses springing up, and a lot more folks settling here and making it their home. A commotion in the doorway caught their attention as Suzanne's husband, Eli, came hurrying out. I heard a rumor you might be headed back to Rocky River. I hope you're staying this time. Daniel nodded slowly. You must have been speaking to Irvin. He smiled as they went inside to get out of the cold. He wrote me, saying that he can't manage the ranch on his own anymore. It took a while for the letter to find me, though. I didn't get into town much where I was working in the mountains. Well, you're back now. Your brother will be glad of some help, that's for sure. Suzanne passed Daniel a steaming mug of coffee as he perched on a stool at the end of the bar. We were sorry to hear about your father. Daniel pulled a slight face. You know, we didn't always see eye to eye, especially about the ranch, but I appreciate that he and Ma built the place from scratch. It's just a shame he was always too busy working to ever take a bit of time to enjoy life, and now it's too late. You'll have a bowl of beef stew and dumplings? Suzanne put the mouth-watering food in front of him without waiting for an answer. The town might have changed, but some things haven't, Daniel chuckled. You're still a great cook. The meaty aromas made his stomach rumble, and he savored the first spoonful, which was all the more tasty because he hadn't had to prepare it for himself. You know she never likes anyone to leave hungry. Eli gave his wife a fond look. They'd never had children, and she channeled all her caring into looking after their guests instead. "So, are you going straight out to the ranch after this, or making a few social calls first?" Suzanne asked lightly. This time, Daniel hesitated before answering. He knew exactly what Suzanne was hinting at. "If you mean, will I be calling on Jean's family while I'm in town? The answer is probably no. It's taken me 5 years, but I've moved on from what happened, and I don't want to stir up any bad feelings. It wasn't your fault that Jean left you the way she did." Suzanne picked her words carefully as she wiped the countertop, giving Daniel a kind smile. "Didn't stop me feeling like a fool, though," Daniel muttered. He sighed, losing his appetite momentarily. Perhaps this was going to be harder than he'd thought. Folks had long memories in Rocky River, but he had to let go of the past if he was to make any sort of life for himself. "Nobody's even heard from her since she ran away," Eli said firmly. "Her family didn't blame you, for what it's worth. They were looking forward to having you as a son-in-law until Jean's head was turned by that traveling salesman, promising her fancy clothes and a life of luxury. Life on the ranch wasn't enough for her. If we'd gotten married, she would have ended up unhappy, and I wouldn't have wanted that for her." "Doesn't justify the way she did it, though," Suzanne muttered. She still felt sore for Daniel that Jean had snuck out of town with her fancy man the morning of her wedding, leaving nothing more than a note explaining that she didn't love him anymore. "It isn't all bad," Daniel replied with a shrug. "I've had 5 good years working as a trapper, getting to see a few different places. Well, I hope you're going to settle down now. Find a good woman to marry and have a family. We've missed you, and I know Irvin has too." Daniel looked startled at Suzanne's words. He had forgotten how direct she could be. "I'm back to help with the ranch, not to get entangled in another relationship," he said firmly. "Suzanne won't take no for an answer," Eli said, shaking his head. "A lot of the mail-order brides stay here before meeting their future husbands, Daniel. Some of them are really pretty and would be more than happy to live on a ranch with a good man. You should think about it." "Nope, I don't want to complicate things with getting a wife. I'll have more than enough to do helping Irvin. Now, tell me about what's changed in town since I left. Is old Abraham still the best person to buy my furs?" As Suzanne chattered away, bringing Daniel up to date on all the new businesses which had established themselves in Rocky River since he'd left, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret at what she had said about starting a family of his own. He was almost 28 years old and always thought he would have been married with children by now. But clearly, it wasn't to be. "You be sure to come by and visit us again as soon as you've settled in at the ranch." Suzanne gave him a quizzical look. "Did you hear anything I just said, or are old memories taking your attention?" Daniel smiled guiltily and reached into his pocket for a couple of coins. "There are plenty of memories, but I suppose it was to be expected. Once I get busy with work, it will probably feel like I never left. The meal's on us." Suzanne pushed the coins back across the counter. She tipped her head to one side slightly. "Just because things didn't work out with Jean doesn't mean you should give up on love altogether, Daniel. I'll be sure and keep it in mind." He put his wide-brimmed hat back on, giving his friends a nod of thanks. A few minutes later, he pulled his wagon to a halt outside a clapboard shed. When he had last seen it before leaving Rocky River, it had been on the edge of town, but the place had expanded so much that it now sat between a new saloon and a dressmaker's store, with colorful bolts of fabric in the window, not to mention several more streets of businesses and new homes beyond. Abe's Furs and Leather. The rough-hewn wooden sign above the door was at least still the same. "Abe Lewis, you don't look a day older than when I left." Daniel grinned as he pushed the door open. The wizened old man inside was sitting at a long workbench that was littered with the tools of his trade. Beaver and deer pelts were hanging from wooden poles overhead and stacked up in towering piles in every corner. He had never seen the place looking so full. "Good morning, Daniel. What have you brought for me today, then?" Abe smiled back at him, revealing a mouth with more gaps than teeth. There was a piece of soft leather with an intricate pattern half finished on the bench in front of him, and he laid down the knife he was using to form the carving. Daniel liked the fact that the old man didn't pry about where he had been. In fact, it was as if he'd never been away. I have the usual skins, furs. They're all bundled up in my wagon outside if you want to take a look. Abe pulled a face and gestured around his workshop. I'm kind of full up at the moment. Short on storage space, too, because the man next door bought the plot of land to build his saloon. Are you saying you don't want to buy anything from me? No, Sonny. I know your fur will be good quality, but you'd be doing me a favor if you could hold on to half of it for now. You'll be coming back into town soon? Yes, I'm pretty sure I'll have to collect supplies sometime. Daniel wondered whether it would be worth asking if anyone else would buy the remaining furs from him instead. He had been counting on the money to give to Irvin as a sort of peace offering. You could try another trader if you need the money, but you won't get a better price than mine. Abe's eyes twinkled under his bushy eyebrows. He knew what was going through Daniel's mind. I'd rather deal with someone I know and trust, and it ain't no trouble bringing it back next time I'm in town. The two men shook on their deal, and Daniel carried the pelts inside that Abe wanted before pocketing the money he gave him in return. It was more than he was expecting, which he was grateful for. It's good to see you back, Abe commented as Daniel climbed back into the wagon. Give your ma my best wishes. Perhaps I'll see her in church. His lined cheeks reddened slightly as Daniel picked up the reins and tipped his hat to say goodbye. I'll pass the message on. He chuckled to himself, wondering whether Abe fancied himself in with a chance of courting his ma now that she was widowed. Seems like romance is all anyone can think about now that it's nearly spring. Daniel's mood felt flat again as his thoughts returned to Jean. He had figured being home would bring back the memories he had tried hard to put behind him, but it was hitting him harder than he expected. Passing the park reminded him of the times they had gone to the various fairs that were held during the year, and when he saw the outline of the wooden church in the distance, he felt the flood of disappointment and shame all over again, remembering how Pastor Franklin had told the small congregation that the wedding had been called off. Folks had been kind about it, of course, but losing Jean had left a gaping hole in his life, which was why he had taken off. Being on the move wasn't all bad, he murmured to himself. At the thought of being so close to home again after all this time, he felt a sudden flicker of nerves in his stomach. It would be strange settling down in one place again when he was used to traveling every few weeks. As he passed the mercantile store, he pulled the wagon to a halt again on a whim. He would buy his ma some wool and a twist of peppermint candy for Irvin, so he wasn't showing up empty-handed. The town was busier than he remembered, which took some getting used to. Laughter drifted out from the saloons, and maids bustled past out shopping for their mistresses. A crowd of young ladies was strolling along the side of the street, stopping every so often to look in the windows of the stores, and several of them gave Daniel coy smiles, hoping to attract his attention. "Excuse me, ma'am." Daniel waited patiently for them to pass. Their excited chatter filled the air, and he realized most of them were mail-order brides. "I've never been so glad to get off the stagecoach. My sweetheart is meeting me tomorrow. I'm so nervous I don't know if I'll be able to speak." "Will we be able to meet for tea, do you think?" The woman at the back of the group was wearing a voluminous cloak, and she had the hood pulled over her head to keep the cold out. Unlike the others, she wasn't talking, and as she passed, she caught Daniel's eye. Her cheeks were gaunt, and worry was etched deep on her face. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "It sure is a cold day." The woman nodded and then hung back a little from the rest of the group. "Could you spare a few coins, sir?" she whispered. Her hand was thin and pale as she reached toward him, and the cloak gaped open to reveal a baby in her other arm. Daniel felt a surge of pity for her, imagining how hard it must be for some of the young ladies to leave everything behind in the hopes of a better life out west. She looked as though she hadn't eaten properly for days, and the thin line of a scar down her cheek made him wonder if she had been hit by her husband. "Of course, ma'am. Take this and use it however you need." He quickly dug some coins out of his pocket and dropped them into her hand. The hand vanished back under her cloak with the money, and she looked up at him through her eyelashes. She looked as if she was about to start crying. "Thank you, sir. You're very kind." "Do you have a place to stay?" Daniel asked. Looking at her closer, he could see that she seemed ill. "I'm returning to my family ranch where my ma and brother live. If you're struggling to afford a boarding house, I'm sure we could put you up for a little while." He realized it might sound forward and gave her an apologetic smile. "I don't mean anything untoward. You'd have your own room next to Ma's." "No, but thank you for the kind suggestion." The woman lowered her gaze and pulled her cloak tighter against the wind. "It sounds like a wonderful place," she added wistfully. "Perfect to raise a child." Daniel nodded and bade her a good day before going into the mercantile. The store was busy, and he had to queue to pay for his items. Looking through the window, he saw she was standing near his wagon, and there was something about her air of hopelessness that tugged on his heartstrings. "Do you know that young lady?" he asked the woman in front of him. She shook her head. "Just another person passing through, probably," she said disinterestedly. Daniel thought about how cold she had looked in spite of the cloak, and decided he would offer to buy her a shawl. But by the time he had gotten back outside, she had vanished. He shrugged and picked up the reins again, pushing Rudy into a fast trot. It was a good hour or more of traveling until he would reach the ranch, and he found that now he was so close, he couldn't wait to get home and see his ma and Irvin again. He wasn't too proud to admit to himself that he had been away for too long. The way he had just upped and left, running away from his broken heart, hadn't been a thoughtful thing to do for his family, and he was determined to make it up to them. As the wagon rumbled along, Daniel's spirits lifted. The snow-covered mountain range, which had always been the backdrop to his life in Wyoming, stood majestically against the clear blue winter sky. Every rise and fall of the jagged peaks was as familiar to him as the lines on his hands. He smiled wider as the twisted oak tree that had been split by lightning when he was a boy came into sight. It was the landmark that meant he was halfway home. "Not far now, Rudy. You'll be glad to see the old place, won't you?" Even the horse was picking up on his sense of anticipation, and his trotting got faster. The hoofbeats were muffled in the snow, and other than that, the silence all around them made Daniel take a deep, appreciative sigh as he felt the tension melt out of his shoulders. Suddenly, the horse's ears flickered as they both heard an unfamiliar noise. Daniel pulled on the reins, and Rudy slowed to a walk. He heard the noise again. It was a sort of whimper that turned into a mewling sound. "Whoa, boy!" Daniel halted the cart and tipped his head to one side before gazing around the nearest paddocks. Was it an animal in pain? Even though he hunted for a living, he couldn't bear to see any creatures suffering in lingering pain. He jumped down and felt for his gun in case he needed to put it out of its misery. The whimper came again, but this time it was louder, and Daniel was shocked to realize that it was coming from the back of the wagon. He leaned over the edge and gasped as he saw movement under one of the thin furs, and a tiny hand emerged. "Huh? A baby?" He leapt into the wagon and pulled the fur pelt aside. Sure enough, it was the baby he had seen not an hour earlier in the ailing woman's arms. It lay swaddled in a ragged cotton sheet, and he realized with a shock that was why she had been standing next to his wagon while he was in the mercantile store. She had abandoned it and run away. At the sight of Daniel's face, the baby's face broke into a gummy smile that melted his heart, and he carefully slipped his hands underneath it and lifted it up. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" he said softly, rocking his arms slightly. The baby yawned, and its eyes started to close again. "You just wanted to be held, huh?" Daniel peeled back the swaddling sheet to see that the infant was dressed in a blue smock. "So you're a little boy." He sat back on the pile of furs for a moment and glanced up into the sky. Holding the baby against his chest had ignited something in him that he couldn't deny. He had always longed for a son to call his own, and missing out on that chance had been one of the hardest things to accept when Jean had left him. "Is this baby meant for me, Lord? Do you want me to care for him and raise him?" The prayer fell from his lips in a whisper, and just at that moment, a shaft of sunlight lit up the land like molten gold, as though to grant Daniel permission to care for the defenseless child in his arms. Chapter 3. Wilmington, Delaware, 1880. Rachel walked faster with her basket of food she had been out to buy for Mrs. Foley, hoping to shake off the man following her, but he matched her pace, much to her annoyance. "Rachel, wait a moment, will you?" She sighed and paused. "What is it, Cecil? I thought I'd made it clear that I'm not interested in courting you or whatever it is you want with me." Cecil Downing frowned and placed his hand possessively on her arm. "That isn't a very kind way to treat me, Rachel. Lester would be turning in his grave if he knew you were being like this to his oldest friend." Rachel stepped back to put some distance between them. "It's funny, but he never used to mention you much, Cecil. Are you sure you were such good friends?" "When we were younger," he replied airily. He gave Rachel an ingratiating smile. "I moved around for work, as I told you, but settling back in Wilmington was the best thing I've done because it allowed our paths to cross again. I'm not looking for a new husband, Cecil. I'm perfectly happy raising Kendra on my own and being Sarah's maid." Rachel felt a surge of annoyance that he was being so persistent, followed by a pang of guilt at his hurt expression. "I'm sure it would be better for you to court a young lady who doesn't already have a child, don't you think?" She added in a softer tone, "It's not my fault that Kendra hasn't taken to me. She doesn't remember her pa, but I talked to her a lot about him." Rachel folded her arms. "Even if I were to consider marrying again, which I'm not at the moment, it would need to be to someone who could raise Kendra as their own daughter." "I'm not sure it's right to put the child's needs first," Cecil retorted. There was a flash of irritation and resentment in his eyes before he hastily pinned a smile on his face again. He took Rachel's hand and squeezed it. "When you and Lester got married, I thought to myself that I'd like a wife just like you. And since he died, I've maintained a respectful distance. But surely you can see we'd make a good couple, Rachel." "I don't think it would be right for Kendra." They had almost reached the house, and Rachel glanced up at the door, hoping that Sarah might call for her so she could excuse herself. "I'm not going to take no for an answer," Cecil said, ignoring her words. "I've set my heart on marrying you, and more to the point, I think it's what Lester would have wanted." "You don't know that," Rachel replied firmly. "Actually, that's not true. His parents liked me very much and used to say we could almost have been brothers. That's why I think you should accept my offer of marriage, Rachel. It's what Lester and his parents would have wanted, so surely you wouldn't want to go against their wishes. Kendra will get used to me soon enough." "And if she doesn't? She's a child," Cecil said with a hint of scorn. "It's not up to her to have so much influence over you, my dear." "And what if it's not what I want?" Rachel knew she sounded stubborn, but she was beyond caring. "Who else would take on a widow with a daughter in tow? It's a good offer, and you'd be a fool to turn me down." Cecil suddenly leaned forward and planted a kiss on her cheek. His thin lips were dry, and Rachel recoiled, stumbling backward. "Get off me," she cried. "I don't want a husband. Besides, Sarah and I might be moving soon, so I won't even be in Wilmington anymore." Before Cecil could respond, Rachel turned and ran up the steps, letting herself in and slamming the door behind her. "What's going on? You look upset." Sarah's face was concerned as she bustled toward her parlor. She put her hand on Rachel's arm. "You're trembling. Is that dreadful man bothering you again?" Rachel nodded. "He just told me he won't take no for an answer, but I know in my heart of hearts he won't love Kendra the way she deserves." "Are you sure? It would be a shame to turn down the chance of marriage, although I would miss you terribly." Sarah picked up the bundle of letters on the sideboard, which had been delivered earlier that day. Her face lit up when she recognized one with some familiar handwriting on it. "Gilbert has written to me again. Perhaps this might be the news we've been waiting for." "Let's hope so. I'm starting to think the only way I can be free of Cecil's attentions is to leave Wilmington." As Rachel took the vegetables and dried fruit through to the kitchen for Mrs. Foley, she wondered how things had gotten in such a tangle with Cecil Downing so fast. He had bumped into her just before Christmas, when she was on her way home from church one day. At first, she had enjoyed his company, and he seemed kind and attentive when he escorted her home from church each week. But before long, it had turned into something else, which now felt laden with an obligation to meet his demands, even though she had been clear from the beginning that she wasn't looking for love. What started as a cordial demeanor had turned into him being possessive, as though she owed him just because he had been Lester's friend. "He's just not right for me and Kendra," she muttered as she saw her daughter happily helping Mrs. Foley prepare lunch. "What's that you said?" Cook asked. "Nothing." Rachel pushed her worries about Cecil to one side and smiled. "What can I do to help? Shall I prepare the vegetables?" Mrs. Foley waved her away. "No, dear. I know you have plenty of other chores to do around the house." The sound of running feet caught their attention, and Sarah burst into the room, wreathed in smiles. "Gilbert has asked me to marry him and travel west to Rocky River." She waved the letter triumphantly. Tears of joy filled Mrs. Foley's eyes, and Rachel clasped her hands to her chest with a happy sigh. "It's everything you wished for, ma'am," Mrs. Foley said. "Didn't I tell you there were plenty of fine men looking to marry if you were prepared to travel to the frontier lands?" "You did," Sarah agreed. She threw her arms around the cook's shoulders. "Are you sure you don't mind me leaving? I'd hate for you to think I didn't appreciate your loyal service all these years." "Certainly not, and your ma was always a very kind mistress, as you have been too." Mrs. Foley pulled a letter of her own from her apron pocket. "My sister wrote me to say I can live with her whenever I'm ready. I just didn't want to tell you until you'd had a proposal." "When does Gilbert suggest you should travel to Wyoming?" Rachel asked. "As soon as possible." Sarah noticed Rachel's worried look. Until now, all their talk about heading west had felt vague, but now it was becoming all too real. "You will still come with me, won't you?" "Are we leaving our home, Ma?" Kendra's eyes rounded with concern as she tried to understand the conversation. "We'll have a better home," Sarah said, anxious to reassure the little girl. Rachel nodded slowly. Although it felt disloyal to Lester in some ways to leave Wilmington behind, the truth was that if Sarah and Mrs. Foley were gone, there was nothing left to keep her here. "It will be a great adventure, Kendra," she told her daughter. "We'll travel on the railroad. Can you believe it? We'll be on a train for at least a week, and when we get to Wyoming, it will be spring, and there will be mountains and rivers." Kendra giggled happily. "I like adventures, Ma, especially if Miss Sarah is with us." Later that afternoon, Mr. Parsons called unannounced, and Sarah insisted that Rachel should sit with them. "I have wonderful news," Sarah announced once Rachel had poured 3 cups of tea. "I replied to an advertisement through the matrimonial bureau in the fall after you told me about Jeffrey, and today I received an offer of marriage from a gentleman in Rocky River." "Marriage? With a stranger?" Mr. Parsons sounded shocked and spluttered as his tea went down the wrong way. "I don't think your papa would have approved of that, Miss Blair. It's all above board, and it was Mrs. Foley who suggested it." "Well, quite. Taking advice about marriage from your cook is hardly a wise decision," Sarah pouted. "I know Papa wanted you to look out for me, Mr. Parsons, but my sweetheart is a highly respected man. He's a manager at one of the banks in Rocky River." "Is that what he told you? Maybe I should look into it first to make sure he's being honest. If you've only gotten to know him through correspondence, he could be making it all up." "I don't need you checking up on me," Sarah said huffily. "I'm a grown woman and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Besides, I've already written a letter of acceptance. I just need to mail it." Mr. Parsons looked apologetic. "I just want to make sure you don't make a mistake." He took a sip of his tea. "The timing is actually rather fortuitous. I came to see you because I've heard that the merchant who owns this house is planning to sell it as he needs to travel to India for business matters." "So we're about to be turned out on the street?" Even though she knew it was coming, Sarah still looked shocked. "I'm sure it wouldn't have been quite so dire, but yes, if you stay in Wilmington, you will have to find lodgings elsewhere." Parsons coughed discreetly. "All the debts for Blair's carriages have been settled. It seems Jeffrey Ritter's business is going from strength to strength, and I also heard he's engaged to marry a wealthy heiress he met in New York." Sarah looked momentarily crestfallen at this news, but then brightened and shot Rachel a smile. "It must be fate that I received Gilbert's proposal today." She reached forward and shook Mr. Parsons's hand. Thank you for acting as the family lawyer. I shall write a new letter to Gilbert and tell him we will be on the earliest train heading west." She jumped up, eager to get started. "What about everything in the house?" Rachel asked. "All your belongings? We won't be able to take much on the train. Perhaps a couple of banded trunks and carpet bags. I'm sure Gilbert will be happy for me to buy more gowns in Rocky River. And I'll make sure you and Kendra are taken care of as well. In that case, I'd better start sorting all your clothes out." Rachel gathered up the teacups and felt the first flutter of excitement in her chest now that things were in motion. Mr. Parsons picked up his hat and stood up slowly. "I can take care of disposing of any furniture and send the money to you if there's any left after my fees. It's been a pleasure, Miss Blair. I wish you the best of luck and will remain at your service if you ever need my legal advice in the future. I'll just do one last check of the house and then we'll be ready to leave." Time had passed quickly, and Rachel's voice echoed around the hallway, which looked strange without the long mahogany sideboard and grandfather clock. "Don't be long. The carriage is waiting outside to take us to the railroad station." Rachel picked up the skirts of her sensible linsey-woolsey dress and ran lightly up the stairs one last time. Mr. Parsons had been true to his word, and a few days earlier, 2 burly men had arrived out front with a horse and wagon and then spent the next hour loading it up with their furniture to take away. Rachel had tried to make light of it with Kendra, but she could tell it had upset her daughter, although Mrs. Foley had soon cheered her up again with a mug of hot chocolate. Her footsteps sounded loud on the bare floorboards, and there were ghostly outlines on the ornate wallpaper where paintings had been removed. She tramped up the narrow back stairs to the servants' quarters and cast her eye around the room, which had been hers for as long as she could remember, other than when she had gotten married. There was nothing left, and she wondered who might live there in the future. Would it be a large family with more servants than the Blairs had had? "Come on, Ma. Miss Sarah says we have to go." Kendra's high-pitched voice drifted up the stairs, and Rachel hastily closed the bedroom door for one last time and ran back downstairs. They had already said tearful goodbyes to Mrs. Foley the day before, so it was time to bid their home farewell. The horse in the carriage harness was fidgeting as Rachel slammed the front door closed, but her heart sank as she saw Cecil hurrying toward them. "Where are you going?" he demanded. His thin lips were pinched together in outrage as he caught sight of Sarah's banded trunks on the back of the carriage. "Are you leaving?" "I did tell you," Rachel said patiently. "We need to get on, or you'll miss the train, ma'am," the coachman called from above. He picked up the reins, and the horse tossed its head, eager to start trotting. "I thought you were kidding. You can't just up and leave like this. I told you you're going to be my wife." Sarah leaned out of the carriage door, looking cross. "Rachel is doing no such thing, Mr. Downing. She's accompanying me as my maid. I'm traveling to Rocky River in Wyoming to get married." Cecil looked shocked. "Wyoming? But we agreed, Rachel. Lester wouldn't have wanted you to cross the country with your daughter. Who knows what sort of dangers you might encounter." "We'll be perfectly safe." Rachel pushed past him and climbed up the steps into the carriage. "My job is with Miss Blair, and I've told you several times that you and I are not courting, Cecil. It's not my fault if you don't listen, and I'll thank you kindly to stop telling me what Lester would have wanted." Sarah leaned forward and glared at Cecil. "Stop hounding poor Rachel. She's told me all about it." "But how dare you?" Cecil's pale cheeks turned red with anger. "You haven't heard the last of this," he spluttered, wagging a finger in Rachel's direction. "Drive on, please," Sarah called to the coachman. The coach lurched forward, and Rachel's last view of Cecil was his scowling face. "Why was that man being so horrible to you, Ma?" Kendra shrank back in her seat, looking alarmed. "Is he coming to Rocky River with us? I don't like him very much." Rachel settled herself in the carriage with a sigh of relief. "No, Kendra, that's the last we'll see of him, thank goodness. He's just mean because he didn't get his own way." "Oh, look, Ma, I put my rag doll in my bag so I can play with it on the train." Kendra had already forgotten about the altercation, and Sarah caught Rachel's eye over the little girl's head and smiled. "It's time for us all to have a fresh start," Rachel continued. Miss Sarah will soon be happily married and will have a new home in a beautiful part of the country. And lots of new friends, Kendra added happily, arranging her rag doll on her lap. Chapter 4. Rocky River, Wyoming. The stagecoach swayed as the driver navigated the rutted ground on the way from Hudsonville to Rocky River, making Rachel wince as she bumped against the door. They had been traveling for days, first on the train and then by coach, and the comforts of home in Wilmington felt like a long time ago. "Are we nearly there, Ma?" Kendra asked. She rubbed her eyes sleepily and peered out through the stagecoach window. "Look at the mountains," she cried. "They look so pretty." Rachel followed her daughter's gaze and couldn't help but smile at the view outside. The trees in the nearby paddocks were just starting to come into leaf, and the golden spring sunshine on the plains beyond lifted her spirits. There was still the occasional patch of snow in some of the shaded parts of the mountains that were in the distance. But the driver had assured them the bad winter weather was over for another year, and they could look forward to warmer days ahead. "I think we're going to be very happy living in Rocky River," she said to Kendra with a smile. Sarah roused herself from where she was dozing in the corner and yawned daintily. "I'm starting to feel a bit nervous now," she confided. "I think we'll be there soon, and Gilbert said he will meet us at the coach stop." "Did Gilbert tell you what his house was like in his letters to you?" Rachel asked. Sarah loved to discuss what he had written about over all the months they had been corresponding, asking her opinion of what hidden meanings about romance they might hold. But thinking back, Rachel realized he hadn't provided much detail about the town itself or where he lived. "Not really. I didn't like to pry too much into his situation," Sarah said airily. Rachel felt a ripple of apprehension. As much as she liked Sarah, there were times when she could be maddeningly vague. "Did you make it clear to him that you were bringing your maid with you on the journey?" She glanced across at Kendra. "And does he know that I have a daughter? I did mention that you should make sure there's room for the three of us in his house." Sarah patted Rachel's arm reassuringly. "You worry too much. And you know, I'll always take care of you and Kendra. You're both like family to me. I know, but you had a lot on your mind, what with the landlord selling the house and all the business matters at Blair's Carriages. I'm glad it's all behind you now." "Exactly. There's no need to worry. Gilbert told me he's in a senior position, and he's very well regarded in town, which means that he must live in a grand house. There's bound to be plenty of space for all of us. As long as he knows what to expect when we arrive." Rachel chuckled at her own nervousness. This whole business of traveling west to marry a man you've never met is strange enough, let alone springing any other surprises on him. One of the other ladies in the stagecoach, called Mary, leaned forward and smiled at Rachel. "Did I tell you that both of my sisters traveled to Oregon to become mail-order brides? It's perfectly normal in these parts. Will you be looking for a new husband yourself once you get to Rocky River?" she asked curiously. Rachel shook her head and glanced at Kendra. Luckily, her daughter was too busy looking out of the window to hear what the woman had said. "Marrying again is not something that I have thought about. All that matters to me at the moment is helping Sarah settle into her new life and doing the best for my little girl." "That's a kind sentiment, my dear, but I'm sure your mistress might like you to find a husband of your own too one day." "I would like that," Sarah agreed, "especially if you could stay in Rocky River." "I won't know a soul, and I would miss you if you left." Rachel shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe I could think about it in the future. You might be surprised and find love sooner than you think." The woman gave a wry chuckle. "From what my sisters told me, there are plenty of single gentlemen out west and a shortage of women for them to wed. That's why the matchmaking agencies do so well. That's what Mrs. Foley, our cook, said too. I was widowed just like you," the woman continued, giving Rachel an encouraging smile. "But as my sisters like to remind me, it's not right to live on memories alone. You deserve a kind-hearted man to take care of you and your little girl." Before long, the stagecoach picked up the pace, and more ranch buildings came into view as they got nearer to their destination. Everything looked so different from what Rachel was used to. and she wondered what it would be like to live in one of the low log cabins surrounded by barns and paddocks. When she had been married to Lester, it had been their dream to move out of Wilmington one day and have a little block of land to call their own. "We'll have a few chickens and 2 rocking chairs on the veranda where we can sit and watch the sun go down," he used to say. She smiled at the memory. If their traveling companion was to be believed, it might be possible for her to marry a rancher out west. But no sooner did that thought pop into Rachel's head than she pushed it away. Who would want a widow with a young daughter? Cecil's mocking words were etched on her mind, not to mention the way he had made it sound as though Rachel was completely undesirable to anyone, and that his offer of marriage had been almost out of pity. He's probably right, Rachel told herself. Taking care of Sarah in her new marriage was the safest way to avoid ever getting hurt again, as she had been when Lester had died. "I do believe we're here," Sarah said, as a few more buildings came into view. She sat up straighter and patted her hair, making sure that her bonnet was on straight. "It sure looks quaint." Rachel was surprised to see that Rocky River was bigger than she had thought it would be. The woman who had served them a hot dinner at the tea shop in Hudsonville the day before had been sniffy about where they were headed, declaring that Rocky River was little more than a one-street outpost. But nothing could be further from the truth. Rachel could see several boarding houses and hotels, and the wide main street was lined with different businesses, including dressmakers, mercantile stores, banks, saloons, bakers, blacksmiths, and the local jail. Ladies strolled along the boardwalks at the side of the street, and she could see several churches and what looked like schoolhouses. "Isn't it nice that the air is so clear?" Mary said, tightening her shawl in readiness to go outside. "I used to live near the factories in 5 Points, and I'm sure it was the filthy fog that took my poor husband to an early grave." The stagecoach driver called to his horses, and the coach came to a stop near the general store. "This is it," Sarah murmured. Her cheeks were pink, but Rachel could tell that she was nervous. "Just think about how Gilbert said he couldn't wait to meet you," Rachel said quietly. "He's not a complete stranger. You know quite a lot about him from his letters." "I know." Sarah fluttered her fan anxiously and then folded it up and put it in her reticule. "I wonder if the pastor will be marrying us today?" Before they had time to consider the wedding itself, the next half hour was taken up with unloading various banded trunks, carpet bags, and hat boxes. Sarah had more luggage than many of the women who had been on the train, and a red-faced porter heaved them onto a handcart in a tidy pile. Sarah looked up and down the street, wondering when her sweetheart would show up. "The stagecoach is a little earlier than usual, arriving in town," the porter said cheerfully. "Don't worry, I'm sure your fiancé will be here soon." Sure enough, a moment later, Rachel saw a gentleman walking purposefully toward them. He was wearing a black suit and had the look of a man who worked inside, in contrast to several rugged-looking ranchers and cowboys who had already ridden past. "I think that's him," Sarah whispered. "Kendra, let's you and me go and look around the mercantile store and give Miss Sarah and Mr. Myers some privacy for a little while." Rachel took her daughter's hand and gave Sarah an encouraging smile. "He looks just how you described," Sarah nodded, looking relieved. They had heard horror stories on the train about women being deceived by the men writing to them, finding out they were 20 years older than they had said they were, or having children already and not telling them. Rachel let Kendra linger as they looked at the array of goods in the mercantile. Compared to the stores they had back in Wilmington, it felt old-fashioned, but in a good way. There were glass jars of candy, boxes of buttons, and bundles of candles, interspersed with hair pomade and ribbons and sacks of flour, sugar, and dried goods behind the counter. It was a pleasing jumble of everything a frontier family would need and more. "Are you new in town?" A plump woman bustled toward them. She had a voluminous calico apron tied around her waist and pulled a twist of peppermint candy from the pocket to offer one to Kendra. "Ethel Duffy, and this here is Elmer, my husband." Her eyes twinkled kindly as Kendra looked longingly at the candy. "Go on, take one." Rachel nodded, and Kendra politely thanked Ethel. "I'm Rachel Campbell, and this is my daughter Kendra," she said by way of introduction. Fresh off the stagecoach, huh? Ethel continued. Are you here to get married? A pretty pair like you two will make one of our men very happy, I'm sure. You must have Scottish blood in you with that red hair and a name like Campbell. You'll make a lovely bride. Oh, no, I'm a maid. That's my mistress outside, Miss Blair. Rachel gestured to the boardwalk where Gilbert had taken off his hat and was busy talking to Sarah. Even from a distance, Rachel could see that Sarah's eyes were sparkling and she was animated, the tiring journey long forgotten. That's a shame, Ethel said. Don't you want to get married too? Rachel blushed at the direct question. Maybe, sometime in the future, she stuttered. Miss Blair wants my help to settle into her new life first. I expect she'll need to entertain guests, what with Mr. Myers being the bank manager, and she wouldn't manage that alone. Bank manager? Gilbert? Elmer paused from his task of weighing out flour on the large set of scales on the counter and gave his wife a confused look. Did he get promoted? Ethel scratched her head and peered out the window again to look at them. Surely not. Mr. Merriweather only became manager last year, and his wife said he's never been happier. She looked back at Rachel. Are you sure Gilbert said he was a bank manager? We've known him for a while, and he's always been a clerk. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he never struck us as the ambitious type. There are several banks in town, aren't there? Perhaps he's the manager at a different one than you're thinking of? Elmer chuckled. Ethel knows everybody and where they work. It isn't that we're nosy, but you get to know everyone's business when you run the mercantile. Has Gilbert moved jobs? No, Ethel said, but he's a very nice gentleman, she added hastily. Not the sort to employ a maid, though, Elmer continued. He eyed Rachel and Kendra with a worried expression. I think maybe your mistress has gotten confused if she thinks Gilbert lives in a grand house with servants. He's an honest man, though. I can't believe he would have set out to deceive her. Rachel sighed as a fresh surge of worry gripped her. It was as she suspected. Sarah had read too much into Gilbert's description of his situation, and she had a sinking feeling that she probably hadn't asked him outright if it was all right to bring Rachel and Kendra. His house is quite small, but maybe there's a little room you and your daughter could share, Ethel said. She sounded doubtful. Well, thank you for your kind welcome to Rocky River. Rachel lifted her chin, reminding herself that moving away from Cecil's unwelcome attention was not such a bad thing, even if Sarah's plan for her was going awry. Do you happen to know where I might be able to find work? I need something that would allow me to care for Kendra. Ethel gave her a kindly look. You wouldn't be the first young lady to arrive here and find herself in trouble. She passed Kendra another piece of peppermint candy. What about Suzanne and Eli? Elmer suggested. I heard they might need someone to help at the Rosebush Inn. Is that the boarding house at the edge of town? Rachel remembered passing it and how she had thought it looked like a welcoming place for weary travelers. She felt her worry ease slightly. Working in a boarding house would be ideal if a room came with the job. At least she and Kendra would have a roof over their heads, and she wasn't afraid of hard work. That's the place. Tell them the Duffys sent you, and good luck, dear. As Rachel crossed the street a moment later, she saw that Sarah was looking troubled. Rachel, I'm so sorry, but I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding, she said, hurrying toward her. Gilbert Myers took his hat off and shook hands with her. I may have given Miss Blair the wrong impression about my job, you see. He gulped nervously. I meant that I hoped I could be the bank manager one day, not that I am already. I got carried away with the idea of keeping you as my maid, and I wanted to do the right thing for you and Kendra. Can you forgive me, Rachel? Poor Gilbert feels terrible, but his little house isn't big enough for all of us. Rachel held up her hand to stem Sarah's stream of garbled apologies. I understand, and truly, it's nobody's fault. Gilbert let out a sigh of relief. I'd hate for you to think badly of me, Miss Campbell, especially as you have your daughter to consider as well. I've already booked the pastor to marry Sarah this afternoon, and I'm not sure I can cancel it. There's no need. Rachel smiled at Sarah. I don't want to spoil your wedding day. But where will you go? Sarah gazed up and down the street as though seeking inspiration. Mr. and Mrs. Duffy in the Mercantile suggested I should try the Rosebush Inn. Apparently, they might be looking for help, or at least I might be able to stay there for a few days in return for doing some chores. Rachel didn't want to think about what she would do beyond that. After dealing with all the business debts at Blair's Carriages, Sarah didn't have much money to her name, and Rachel only had a couple of coins in her reticule. "Can you put in a good word for her?" "Gilbert," Sarah pleaded. "You're the sort of man they would trust, and I can vouch for Rachel's good character. She served our family with great loyalty for many years. It's the least I can do." Gilbert looked relieved that their misunderstanding wouldn't cause Rachel and Kendra to be homeless. He hastily arranged for the porter to look after Sarah's luggage and hooked Rachel's single carpet bag over his arm. "Step this way. It's just along the street, and Suzanne and Eli are very well respected. They'll look after you, Rachel, don't worry." Chapter 5. Daniel breathed deep lungfuls of the fresh spring air as Rudy clopped along the road beneath him. The sky was blue, and there was a hint of warmth in the air. It was the sort of day that made a man grateful to be alive, he thought happily. The grass was starting to green up, which was a relief as they didn't have much hay left for feeding their stock. He patted his pocket to double-check he had the list his ma, Eve, had written for him. She wanted flour and sugar for baking, fabric to sew, Tom some baby clothes, and he also had an invitation to deliver to Suzanne and Eli. "It's high time we invited a few friends over to meet baby Tom," Eve had told him again that morning. She said it so many times that he hadn't been able to ignore it any longer. "He's not really my baby, Ma. Won't folks think it's a bit strange?" It was the same argument Daniel had used each time. At first, Eve had agreed, but now that Daniel had been caring for Tom for a couple of months, she had changed her mind. That poor woman abandoned her baby for reasons known only to her. Maybe she knew she didn't have long to live, or figured that she couldn't give him the sort of home and upbringing he deserves. Daniel had thought long and hard about why she had left the baby in his wagon, and also come to the same conclusion, but hadn't spoken it aloud. "Either way," Eve continued, "we're not going to be ashamed of raising Tom as our own. I can already see that you love him like a son, so why shouldn't we be proud of having him as part of our family? It's not that I want to hide him away, Ma, but I'm worried that someone might be looking for him. I mean, he must have a father somewhere." Eve had waved his concerns away. "Maybe his pa died? Or didn't want him? Why else would the woman have put him in your wagon? You showed her some kindness, and as you said, she thought life on the ranch sounded perfect to raise a child. It was meant to be, Daniel. Call it fate or the Lord's will." Daniel's brother Irvin had nodded his agreement. "How about just inviting Suzanne and Eli over to meet him? They're our friends, and you know they won't judge us. Once you get used to the idea, then it will be all right for other people to know as well." As Rocky River came into view, Daniel thought more about what his mother had said. It was true that he had started to feel like Tom was the son he had never had with Jean. On the fateful day he discovered the baby in his wagon, he had been torn between turning right around and taking him straight back into Rocky River and keeping him to raise as his own child. The fact that it was almost nightfall had persuaded him to continue on out to the ranch. Daniel smiled as he remembered his homecoming. Eve had hobbled out onto the veranda, crying with happiness as she hugged him, and any differences of opinion between him and his brother Irvin had been put to one side. He was just grateful to have Daniel home again. But when Daniel pulled back the fur blanket to reveal the baby boy, explaining that he had been abandoned, Eve had been even more delighted. "Praise the Lord," she said softly, gently rocking him in her arms. "The poor little boy needs love and a place to call home, and that's exactly what we will give him." She had dispatched Irvin to go and get fresh milk from their cow. "What should we name him?" Daniel asked later that night as they stood around the old family crib where the baby was fast asleep. "What about calling him after Pa's middle name?" Irvin suggested. Eve's eyes had filled with tears at the kind gesture, and so the baby was named Tom Daniel Roscoe. Not a day had gone by since then that Daniel hadn't prayed to know if he was doing the right thing. At first, He told himself they would only keep Tom a few days, just until he went into town again. But the days slipped by, and Tom brought so much happiness to the household that Daniel unconsciously found himself thinking up reasons not to go into Rocky River to try and find out what happened to Tom's mother. But guilt gnawed at his gut, and he felt as though he could never truly enjoy having Tom unless he found out the truth. "Guide me, O Lord," he murmured, turning his face up into the sunshine. What if his ma regrets giving him up? Will you please show me the path to take so I can be sure that raising Tom is the right thing to do? It was the same prayer he had uttered many times, but somehow today felt different. He had avoided coming into town, knowing that really it was his way of avoiding the truth. But this time, he felt a sense of peace enter his heart, and he turned his horse toward the offices of Sheriff Jackson to make it his first call. "Howdy, Daniel. I heard you were back on the ranch." Sheriff Grant Jackson stood up from behind his desk and stretched. "Will you join me for a cup of coffee?" He grabbed a second tin mug and poured the thick brew into it without waiting for his reply. "How's your ma coping since your pa died?" Daniel took a mouthful of the strong coffee and nodded his appreciation. "Thanks for asking. She's getting on with things. You know how it is. The work on the ranch always needs doing, no matter what happens. I guess it's good to keep busy. I haven't seen you in town since you got back. Irvin said he had plenty of ideas to improve the place." We're working well together. I thought I would miss the fur trapping and moving around, but it's nice to stay put. Time to get married and start a family, perhaps." The sheriff gave his friend a mischievous grin. "There are plenty of nice young ladies heading to Rocky River looking for a new start, and I'm sure your ma wouldn't want you hankering after Jean still." Daniel strolled toward the stove in the corner under the guise of warming his hands. There were 6 posters nailed to the wall. The men pictured in them looked like bad news, bandits and outlaws intent on evading justice. "All in good time, Grant. My first duty lies with the ranch. Plus, there's something else taking up my time that I need to talk to you about." "Go on." The sheriff gave Daniel a curious glance at the tone of his voice, which suddenly sounded nervous. "I've always wanted to raise a family, but, well, that didn't work out with Jean, as you know. The thing is, an unexpected opportunity came my way recently." Sheriff Jackson paused from flicking through the paperwork on his desk, wondering where Daniel's story was going. "To have a family?" he asked. "I thought you just said you weren't interested in getting married." Daniel sighed. This was proving harder than he'd thought it would, because he couldn't bear the idea of having to give Tom up again unless it was to his real mother. He decided the best approach was complete honesty. Grant was too good at sniffing out falsehoods. "The day I came back to Rocky River, I stopped to buy a few supplies and got talking to a young woman. She looked half-starved, with a scar on her face that made me wonder if she'd been beaten. I gave her some money to buy a hot meal, even offered for her to come and stay at the ranch for a few days if that would help her, because she had a baby, you see." That was good of you." She said no, but told me it sounded like a nice place to raise a family. Daniel scuffed the toe of his boot on the dusty wooden floor, wondering if Grant had figured it out yet. "That's what I meant when I said you should look for a bride. There are plenty of women from back east who would love to live on a ranch. What I'm trying to say, in a roundabout way," Daniel took another swig of coffee. "Halfway back to the ranch, just as it was starting to get dark, I heard a baby whimpering. I could scarcely believe it, Grant. She'd abandoned her son and put him in the back of my wagon. I've been caring for him ever since, with Ma's help, and it's like she wanted me to have him." Sheriff Jackson's face was impassive, but Daniel reminded himself that he was used to dealing with criminals, so it had to be. He plowed on. "I keep wondering if she did it out of desperation, and now she regrets it. Ma says that she must not have wanted the baby. We've named him Tom, but I can't get it out of my mind that she might want him back. And this young woman had a scar on her face, you say?" "Yes, across her cheek, like this." Daniel traced his finger in a curve across his own cheek. It looked kind of recent, too, as though it had only just healed. "In that case, I think I know who she is." Sheriff Jackson shook his head sorrowfully. "A few weeks ago, we found a woman's body in the snow, Frozen to death, the poor thing. She had nothing on her to identify her, but I made a few inquiries, of course. The porter at Hudsonville Station reckoned she might have come on the train from New York as a mail-order bride. He remembered the scar as well and felt sorry for her. He didn't mention anything about a baby, though. When she asked me for money, she was wearing a big cloak. It was only when I handed her the coins that I saw the baby underneath. She might have been keeping him hidden. It's a sad business, the sheriff said with a sigh. She won't be the last one fleeing from a bad situation, though, I'm sure. I expect whoever was meant to marry her decided not to when they realized she had a baby. Daniel felt a wave of pity for the woman who had died alone. But also, it was tinged with relief that she had wanted to save Tom. It must have been a hard decision for her, giving Tom away, he said quietly. If it's any consolation, I don't think she would have lived even if we'd found her in time. Grant put his hand on Daniel's shoulder and squeezed it. Perhaps it was the Lord's will that you showed her some kindness on that day. She must have seen something in you that gave her hope her baby would be safe and cared for. That's what Ma said. Daniel felt a weight lifting from him, now that his secret was out. What about the law? I've grown to love Tom as though he were my own boy, but that doesn't make me his father. Sheriff Jackson shrugged and then smiled. Nobody has come forward looking for the young woman or for Tom. And in my opinion, I couldn't think of a better family to raise him if you're sure that's what you want to do. Daniel nodded happily. Now that I know she's not missing him, yes, it is. Will you manage by yourself? Eve isn't getting any younger, and ranching can be long hours. May is happy to help. A shadow of worry crossed Daniel's eyes as he reassured the sheriff. Grant was right. It was a lot to expect his ma to raise a baby when he and Irvin were so busy outside. He wondered what would happen once Tom was toddling and into everything, or if Eve became too frail to cope. Maybe you should get a housekeeper. I know you want to do your best, Daniel, and living with you is far better than putting Tom into an orphanage. But if I knew you had help from a younger woman, I could rest easier about the situation. I'll think about it. Daniel put the empty mug down and slapped Grant on his shoulder. Thanks for giving me a chance with Tom. I appreciate it. Get a housekeeper, Grant added again. It will be good for all of you to have a young lady helping you. Uh-huh. I'll tell Ma and Irvin what you said. Daniel put his hat on and opened the door to leave before Sheriff Jackson changed his mind. Call in and meet Tom next time you're passing. Ma always asks after you. Now that Daniel felt as though he'd had the sheriff's blessing to raise Tom, his spirits lifted as he strode through town. He wasn't the only person feeling optimistic. The fact that winter was over and spring was in the air made everyone more cheerful, and he stopped to chat with several old friends who told him they were glad to see he'd come home again. This fabric is lovely and soft, Ethel Dyer said in the Mercantile, folding it up and wrapping it in brown paper. It was pale blue, and she gave him a quizzical look. For baby clothes, huh? We didn't know you'd gotten married while you were away. Daniel shook his head. I'm not married, Mrs. Duffy. It's hard to explain, but I have a little boy to care for, and Ma wants to sew him some clothes. Ethel's eyebrows lifted slightly higher than they already had. You're raising a child alone? Goodness me, Daniel. Why don't you advertise for one of those delightful mail-order brides we see in the store practically every day? It's high time you forgot about Jean. She sniffed with disapproval. She put the past behind her quickly enough, so you should too. A handsome man like you would get lots of replies to an advertisement, even with a baby. Leave him be, Elmer said good-naturedly from behind the counter. He took Daniel's money and winked at him as he made a note of the purchases in his ledger. My Ethel won't rest until everyone is happily married. I reckon she does almost as much matchmaking as Mrs. Devereaux in the matrimonial bureau. Don't listen to him, Ethel replied. I just know you'd make a good husband is all, she added, handing Daniel his parcel. Maybe one day in the future. Daniel couldn't help but chuckle at how many of the townsfolk seemed determined for him to settle down. He had forgotten about that aspect of small-town living on his travels. A short while later, he got back off Rudy and hitched the horse outside the Rosebush Inn. It was his last call of the day, and he was keen to get back to Tom and the ranch, but he had promised Eve he would give Suzanne and Eli her invitation. "A cup of coffee for you? Or something stronger?" Daniel was surprised to see a stranger in the area of the guest house where drinks and food were served. She was slim, with coppery curls tied in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her green-eyed gaze was direct but friendly as she waited for his answer. I called in to see Suzanne and Eli." Daniel found himself feeling slightly tongue-tied. "I have an invitation for them to come and meet my baby son, Tom." "How lovely," the woman replied. "You and your wife must be very happy. Suzanne's just out the back. I'll get her for you." "I'm not married. There's no wife involved," Daniel blurted out. He wasn't sure why he wanted her to know that, and he twisted his hat in his hands, feeling awkward. "Did I just hear you say you have a baby?" Suzanne bustled in with a look of shock on her face. Daniel nodded and gave her a hasty explanation. The green-eyed woman was busy wiping down the tables, but he could tell she was listening. "So the sheriff said I can raise Tom as my own," Daniel finished, after explaining about how the baby had been given up. "But he'd like me to have some help because of Ma getting older and me and Irvin being so busy on the ranch. A housekeeper, perhaps." Suzanne looked slightly envious, and it was only then that he remembered she and Eli hadn't been able to have children of their own. "I love him as my own," Daniel said softly. "Of course you do," Suzanne said, giving him a smile. "Eli and I have always said you'd make a wonderful pa. You don't happen to know of anyone looking for a housekeeper's position? I have a feeling Sheriff Jackson might check up, and I guess I am a bit worried it might be too much work for Ma, even though she would never admit it. I want her to enjoy Tom, not run herself ragged." Suzanne picked up a tablecloth from her laundry basket and folded it, giving him a thoughtful look. "What sort of young lady are you looking for?" "Someone who doesn't mind being on the ranch, of course, and who understands how to look after a baby. Other than that, I don't know. What do you suggest? What about if they had a child of their own? Would that matter?" Daniel shook his head. "Not at all. You know, a ranch is a nice place to raise children. That's why Tom's poor mother left him in my wagon, I think." "In that case, I have an idea. Allow me to introduce you to Rachel." Suzanne smiled to herself as Daniel's cheeks flushed slightly when he looked across the room at the woman who had just served his coffee. "Rachel and her young daughter, Kendra, have been helping us out for a few days, and I can vouch for her being hardworking and good with children." The young woman came over, suddenly looking shy. "I'm Rachel Campbell," she said, giving Daniel a polite nod. "Suzanne and Eli have been very kind, letting us stay here for a few days, but I am looking for work. I was a maid, and I raised my little girl alone after my husband died." "Rachel would be perfect for you, Daniel," Suzanne said. She smiled at Rachel. "Didn't I say something would turn up? We've known Daniel and his family for years, and I think you and Kendra would be very happy on their ranch. As our housekeeper," Daniel added hastily. He didn't want Rachel to get the wrong idea and think he was looking for a wife. "I'm coming back with the wagon for supplies next week, so I could fetch you then." "A housekeeping role would be very nice, thank you. I'm certainly not looking for a husband, just so we're clear." Rachel bobbed her head again, and Daniel wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. Chapter 6. "Let me help you up, Miss Campbell." Rachel blushed slightly as Daniel handed her up onto the buckboard wagon seat. He had already lifted Kendra up, and she was happily waving to Suzanne and Eli. "Mrs. Campbell," Rachel said, hastily correcting him. "And thank you." "Sorry," Daniel muttered with an apologetic smile. He placed her carpetbag behind the seat and jumped up to sit next to her. "Don't forget to come and visit us just as soon as you have more time," he called to Suzanne, lifting his hat. "Ma's itching to introduce you to Tom." "We will, don't worry. We figured it would be nice to give Rachel and Kendra time to settle in first." Suzanne and Eli linked arms and smiled up at them. "Thank you for all your help, Rachel. Mind you, encourage Daniel to take some time off work now and again so he can show you around that ranch of his." "I'm not going to make the same mistake Pa did," Daniel chuckled. He picked up the reins and clicked his tongue. "Are you ready to meet everyone, Kendra?" he asked cheerfully. "We have new chicks in the coop that recently hatched, and I think you're going to enjoy learning to care for them. What do you reckon?" Rachel felt a pang of nervousness as the wagon rolled forward. Even though she had only been at the Rosebush Inn for a couple of weeks, it had started to feel like home, and Suzanne and Eli were easy company. Sarah had also called in to see her several times, full of excitement about what she was doing to make Gilbert's house more cozy and how much married life suited her. Leaving all that behind to live out of town on the Roscoe's ranch would mean yet more change for her and Kendra. "It's not so bad living out of town," Daniel said, as though reading her mind. He shot her another apologetic smile that made Rachel wonder if he was feeling as nervous as she was. "I suppose it's easy for me to say that because I grew up there. What I mean is that it's only about an hour out of Rocky River, and we go in regularly for supplies. You'll still be able to meet your friends." Rachel adjusted her bonnet so it wouldn't blow off in the breeze. The sun was warm, and she wondered if she would soon have a dusting of freckles over her cheeks. It didn't take long, with her fair complexion. "I don't mind," she said. "When we lived in Wilmington, I used to long for wide open spaces. Look at those cattle, Ma. They look really big and scary." Kendra pointed to a herd grazing in one of the pastures at the edge of town. "They're not so bad as long as you treat them with respect," Daniel said. "What did you mean about not making the same mistake as your pa?" Rachel asked a little way into the journey. "If you don't mind telling me?" Daniel gave her a rueful look. "Pa and Ma claimed our block of land when they were newly married and worked hard all their lives to make a success of things. That sounds like they had your best interests at heart." "Uh-huh. But Pa rarely took time off to enjoy the fruits of their labor with Ma. I think she would have liked to take a walk by the creek sometimes or just sit on the veranda and watch the sun go down. But he was always too busy, and in the end he ran out of time." Rachel nodded. "I can see both sides of it. I had to work hard at Miss Blair's house to keep a roof over Kendra's head after my husband died. But we still had time to do nice things on a Sunday afternoon. It's not a big deal, but I guess Suzanne just meant that there's more to life than just work." "Sitting on the veranda watching the sun go down sounds nice, Mr. Roscoe," Kendra said, giving him a shy smile. Rachel blushed slightly at the fact that she was thinking the same. "You must call me Daniel," he said to Kendra. "You too," he added, looking at Rachel. The rest of the journey passed pleasantly as Daniel showed them points of interest. The gnarled tree, which had been split by lightning, made Kendra's eyes widen with alarm that the weather could do such a thing, and Daniel explained that living at the foot of the mountains meant they had to cope with storms, floods, and deep snow in the winter. "Ma's looking forward to having you at the ranch," he said as they turned off the road and followed the track toward the homestead. "Oh my, it looks delightful," Rachel cried as the homestead came into sight. If someone had asked her to describe the perfect place to live, Roscoe Ranch would have been it. There was a long log cabin, which had silvered with age, with smoke drifting up from the chimney. Beyond it, she could see a well-tended garden, an orchard, and a scattering of barns and corrals. "I'm glad you like it." Daniel seemed surprised at how taken she was with it. The Blairs had a nice house back in Wilmington, but it wasn't far from a rough neighborhood. "This looks like a paradise by comparison." Rachel smiled at Kendra, who was fidgeting in the seat next to her as though she couldn't wait to get down and explore. "I guess I take it all a little for granted." "It's nice to see it through your eyes and feel grateful for our good fortune." Daniel chuckled. "Having just said I won't make the same mistakes as my pa, it's easy for me just to see the problems. Broken fences that need to be mended and grass that isn't growing fast enough for our liking." He tipped his hat back and looked around. Rachel was right. In the spring sunshine, the homestead did look welcoming, and he felt a sudden surge of happiness for her showing him her appreciation for the place. Rachel found herself warming to Daniel. He had an easy way about him, especially with Kendra, as though he wanted to do everything possible to help them settle in. "I hope you won't mind Ma's chattering." His blue eyes crinkled with amusement as they reached the homestead, and the door flew open before he'd even halted the wagon. "I think she finds it a bit lonely with just me and Irvin for company." A plump, gray-haired woman waved from the veranda. Tom was on her hip, kicking his legs with excitement and waving a pudgy fist. "That's Ma and my little boy," Daniel explained, even though it wasn't necessary as he looked so like Eve. "We've been counting the minutes until we heard the wagon." Eve bustled down the steps as Daniel quickly hitched the horse and helped Rachel and Kendra down. "Welcome to Roscoe Ranch, Mrs. Campbell, and you must be Kendra. What a delightful pair you are," she added happily. Daniel lifted Tom from Eve's arms and jigged him up and down, making him squeal with giggles. "Say hello to Mrs. Campbell and Kendra, Tom. They're going to help take care of you." Rachel's heart squeezed with an emotion she couldn't quite place as she saw the glow of paternal pride on Daniel's face. She realized a moment later that it was regret because Kendra had never known her father and would never know what it was like to have a father figure love her in the way it was obvious that Daniel felt for Tom. Even though he wasn't Tom's real pa, she could see instantly that it was true what he'd said. He loved the boy like his own. "He's a little poppet," Rachel said. She reached out to stroke Tom's cheek, and he grabbed her finger, clinging on like a limpet. "He likes you," Eve said with a relieved sigh. She turned to Daniel. "Irvin had to ride out to the river. He saw wolf tracks, and he wanted to make sure the cattle were all right." "Wolves live here?" Kendra's eyes rounded with alarm, but Eve just patted her shoulder. "They mostly stay up in the woods, but we don't like to take any chances. If they're hungry, they'll kill one of our cattle. Now, how about Rachel brings little Tom inside, and I'll show you both to your room so Daniel can unhitch the wagon." Rachel felt a moment of panic as Daniel passed the baby to her. Even though she had relished being a mother to Kendra, it felt different when it wasn't her own. "Don't worry, I won't be long." Daniel lingered by her side as Eve took Kendra's hand and led her up the veranda steps. "I know everything will feel strange for a few days, but we're very grateful to have you here, Mrs. Campbell." The feeling of Tom in her arms and the sweet baby smell from his downy curls suddenly made all Rachel's worries melt away. Everything felt as natural and familiar as it had been with Kendra, and her heart softened as Tom looked up at her with solemn eyes before giving her a gummy smile. "Your pa can take as long as he needs, can't he?" she said in a light voice to Tom. She rocked him slightly in an unconscious movement that came straight back to her. "I'll get on and unhitch the wagon then." Daniel still seemed reluctant to leave her side. "Ma will show you around the house. It's not grand, though. Not like what you were probably used to." "It looks perfect," Rachel said, stroking Tom's cheek. His eyelids were drooping, and she knew he would be asleep shortly. "Mrs. Campbell is a bit formal. You can call me Rachel if you like." She glanced up at Daniel, noticing how his blonde hair was curling slightly over his collar, in need of a cut. "Thank you. We'd like that," he said quietly. He reached out to touch Tom just at the same moment that Rachel turned, and his fingers brushed over her hand, making her pulse quicken unexpectedly. For a man who had the broad-shouldered physique and rugged features of someone who worked long days outside, he could be remarkably gentle. She was fast discovering that Daniel had hidden depths, and for the first time since becoming widowed, Rachel found herself wondering what it would be like to fall in love again, and to be held in Daniel's powerful arms as he looked deep into her eyes. Chapter 7. "So, how are you liking life on the ranch so far, Rachel, now that you've been here a month?" Irvin buttered a thick slice of bread and then added a dollop of Eve's berry preserve on top for good measure. "Is it what you expected for someone who always lived in a busy place in the East?" Rachel carried the pan of crisp bacon and fried eggs to the table and divided the food between the plates, making sure that Daniel and his brother had the biggest portion. "Honestly, it's better than I ever thought it would be." Irvin glanced across at Daniel and grinned. "Looks like Sheriff Jackson had the right idea by suggesting a housekeeper. My stomach's certainly not complaining," he added, eyeing up the tasty food as Rachel passed a plate to him. "He's easily pleased," Daniel joked, rolling his eyes. "Thank you, Rachel, for everything you do. It's a big weight off my mind, knowing that all the household chores aren't just down to Ma anymore." Irvin took a swig of coffee and sat back in his chair. "We're glad you and Kendra like it here. Ranch life doesn't suit everyone." "I guess it might be hard if you're not raised to it," Rachel said thoughtfully. I heard one of our neighbors had a terrible falling out with his brother when he took on one of those mail-order brides, and she couldn't bear being out in the country. It almost split the whole family apart until she flounced off back east. Irvin's eyes flicked back to his brother as he remembered too late about what Jean had done. I don't think it has anything to do with being raised with ranch life or not, Daniel muttered. It's more about someone's character and attitude. Rachel and Kendra are always ready to try something new and don't complain over a little hard work. It doesn't feel like hard work when there's always a beautiful view to see or new animals being born. It's an adventure. We've certainly been having an adventure, haven't we, Kendra? Eve bustled into the kitchen, catching the end of the conversation as she put a basket of eggs on the side. Look, Ma, we found an abandoned puppy when we went to collect the eggs. Kendra was breathless with excitement as she produced a wriggling bundle from her apron pocket. Can we keep him, Daniel? She pleaded. Let me see. Daniel held his hands out and Kendra carefully put the pup into them. He was small, tan, and white in color, with a black mark over one eye, which made him look surprised. You didn't see any sign of the mother? He asked Eve. No, we had a good look around the barns. I reckon it might be one of the dogs belonging to those hunters or cowboys who passed through. They probably kept the pups they wanted and discarded the runt. Poor little thing. Rachel bent over to stroke him, and Daniel's heart beat faster as he got a hint of the warm, slightly floral scent that he'd often noticed she wore. It reminded him of fresh summer pastures. What about having a puppy around baby Tom? Rachel asked, giving him a worried look. Are you sure it's safe for him? Sure. I don't think a pup raised with us would be a problem. In fact, I think it's a good idea. Would you like to have him as your own, Kendra? Really? She squeaked. Oh, thank you. She threw her arms around Daniel's waist and hugged him. Daniel's cheeks flushed with pleasure at the little girl's joyful gesture, and Rachel smiled. Thank you. I think it will be lovely for Kendra to have her own dog. We could never have one in Wilmington. The Blair family didn't have any animals. Rachel thought again about how good Daniel was with Kendra. She sent up a silent prayer of gratitude that not once had he made her feel as though he regretted taking on a housekeeper who already had a child. Irvin and I always had a dog of our own when we were growing up, didn't we, Ma? Eve chuckled. They sure did. Edward always believed that every ranch child should have their own horse and dog. He said it taught them how to care for animals, which would make them better with the cattle when they were older. We could tell you some tales about when we were children, Kendra, Irvin said, stifling laughter. Maybe tonight I'll tell you about the time Daniel went looking for honey in the woods and came galloping back with bees chasing him. Well, don't get me started about how many times you fell off that old Mustang you were trying to break in, Daniel shot back. Rachel pottered around the kitchen, tidying up, and privately marveled at how easily she and Kendra had fitted in with the Roscoe family. The first few days had been hard, of course. She was mindful of not wanting to offend Eve, understanding that as the matriarch of the house, she would have her own way of doing things. But Eve had been gracious about letting Rachel gradually take on more jobs as the days passed, letting her find her feet slowly. And now they had a steady routine to the day. Rachel would get up first, add wood to the fire, and stoke the range to get porridge or bacon on the go. She insisted on Daniel teaching her how to milk their cow, so that was her next task, before returning inside to get Tom up and fed. Irvin and Daniel headed straight out to check the cattle before coming back in for breakfast, and Kendra helped Eve collect the eggs. Breakfast was always a sociable time as they discussed the day ahead. And Rachel admired the way that Daniel always made time to play with Tom and talk to Kendra about what he had seen that morning outside. Whether it was to tell her about a bird he had spotted or explain how they cared for the cattle, he always had an interesting tidbit of news to share. And Kendra hung on to his every word, eager to learn from him. What do you have planned for today? Daniel asked Rachel once Irvin had pulled on his coat and gone back outside again. Just the usual. I thought it would be nice to take Tom out in the orchard later, seeing as it's such a lovely day. I need to start weeding the vegetable patch. I was wondering if you'd like me to start teaching you to ride? Daniel's question was nonchalant, as though he didn't mind either way. Rachel pulled a face. I was worried you might suggest that sometime. We don't have to if you don't feel ready, but you can't live on a ranch and not be able to ride a horse. Rachel, Eve said. She looked up from her pile of mending and smiled. You'll miss out on too many wonderful times is why. Don't worry, I can mind Kendra and Tom. Daniel will have you riding in no time. I guess I'll have to overcome my fears if I want to set a good example for Kendra, Rachel said quietly to Daniel. He nodded. I promise you'll love the sense of freedom as soon as you get your confidence. There's nothing better than loping across our land with the wind on your face, especially in the summer when we go to the high pastures to check the cattle. Kendra and Tom will be joining us in a few years too. You may as well have my old mare Floss, Eve said. My riding days are behind me now. Rachel felt a dart of happiness at how Daniel casually implied that she and Kendra would be here for many years to come. It gave her a sense of home, which had always been missing since Lester died, even if Daniel didn't realize it. I'll see you out by the corral in an hour. I have a few barn chores I need to do, and then I'm free for the rest of the day. He whistled cheerfully as he picked up his hat and strode out, not giving Rachel time to find a reason to put it off. Rachel weighed out the ingredients for baking and started mixing the sugar, butter, and eggs before adding flour and dried fruit. I remember being as nervous as anything when Edward and I first claimed this land. I'd never ridden a horse in my life. Just like you, Eve said conversationally. She stood up to check that Tom was still asleep in the wooden crib near the hearth. I hope I don't fall off too many times. Don't worry about that, Eve chuckled. Daniel will take things slowly. He has a heart of gold, that man, if I say so myself, and he wouldn't like to see you get hurt, I can assure you. Rachel glanced out the window and smiled as she saw Kendra running after Daniel with the puppy still under her arm. He stopped and knelt down to stroke the dog, and she could see he was explaining something to her, which she listened to with rapt attention. A moment later, Kendra slipped her hand into his as though it was the most natural thing in the world, and they stood together, watching the puppy snuffling in the grass. I wasn't the least bit surprised when Daniel decided to raise Tom, Eve said softly, following her gaze. He's always talked about having a family of his own ever since he was a little boy. Injured animals, birds that were hurt and couldn't fly, he always used to bring them home and nurse them until they were better. I know some folks in town might think trapping for fur is cruel, but when he was a trapper, he always made sure the animals never suffered. A clean shot, and he only ever took what he needed to make a living. I can see how Kendra has taken to him, Rachel replied. I know he doesn't like to talk about it, but it must have been hard when Jean left him. She hesitated, not sure whether she should have mentioned it, but Eve just nodded. It sure was. At the time, he was convinced she was the right woman for him and that they would have children together. She gave Rachel a look that was hard to read. I was sad for the way she upped and left him on the morning of their wedding. It was humiliating for him. But truthfully, I wasn't too upset that she didn't go through with the wedding. They weren't that well suited. Not like... She stopped abruptly and turned away to fetch the baking tin. Never mind, she muttered. It's a shame that he left the ranch for all those years. 5, was it? You must have missed him. It was what he needed to do to get over her. And do you think he is? Over Jean? Rachel's voice was light as she concentrated on pouring the cake mixture into the tin and putting it in the range to cook. Before Eve had a chance to reply, they were interrupted by Tom, who woke up with a whimper that quickly escalated into crying, needing a feed. Rachel hurried over to the crib and lifted him up, rocking him gently as she warmed some milk for him over the range. He was a good-natured baby, and the crying soon subsided to be replaced with babbling once she comforted him and his hunger pangs were taken care of. The clock on the dresser chimed just as Eve had finished cleaning up from the baking, and Kendra came back into the cabin, chattering happily to the puppy, which she had named Duke. Daniel said he's gotten the mare saddled up for you, Ma, she called. Come on, Duke. You need to be a good dog while I help Eve with baby Tom. The puppy scampered after her, then flopped in front of the hearth, worn out. Rachel hurried back from her bedroom a few minutes later, smoothing her hands self-consciously over the riding habit that Eve had lent her. "Are you sure you don't mind me going outside for a while?" she asked again. "Mind? I want you to, Rachel." Eve shooed her away. "I never had the chance to reply to your earlier question about Jean. The truth is, I've never seen Daniel happier than since he adopted Tom, and then you and Kendra arrived. He's like a changed man. I only wish my husband were still alive to see it. I'll see you later then." Rachel was too taken aback by Eve's comment to say more. "Take as long as you like. Learning to ride my old mare isn't something you can rush." Rachel's spirits lifted as she walked across the yard, partly because of the thought of spending time in Daniel's company in the sunshine, but also because of what Eve had said. She was growing fond of the older woman, but her feelings for Daniel were more complicated. She felt a tug of attraction every time they were together, but then guilt that it was disloyal to Lester. A widow can't live on memories alone. The words spoken by Mary in the stagecoach as they'd first arrived in Rocky River came back to her. Daniel's face lit up as he caught sight of her. "The mare's ready for you," he called. He held the gate open for her and gave her a smile of encouragement. "I think you're going to surprise yourself at just how much you enjoy this." "I'll take your word for it," she replied. A shiver of desire rippled through her as she felt his strong hands around her waist when he helped her up into the saddle a few minutes later. Maybe it's time to think of the future instead of living in the past. The thought caught her off guard, but she didn't push it away this time. The next couple of hours passed quickly, and just as Daniel had promised, Rachel soon found the strangeness of being perched on top of a horse more pleasurable than terrifying. The first time the mare went faster than a walk, she clung to its mane, convinced she was about to be thrown off, but gradually she progressed to a trot, even though it felt like she was discovering muscles she never knew she had, given how they ached. "You have good balance. You just have to trust her," Daniel said from the center of the corral. "It's easy for you to say that. You've probably been riding since before you could walk." Rachel sounded breathless, and her words came out in gasps as the mare circled him. "Sounds about right," he replied with a chuckle. "Imagine you have Tom in your arms," he said, watching her progress through narrowed eyes. "Pretend he's asleep and you don't want to wake him by jiggling around." "Relax and keep my arms soft, you mean?" Rachel tried that, and suddenly everything made sense. Rather than fighting to stay balanced, she realized that she could adapt to the mare's rocking movements better by going with them. "I've done it," she cried happily. "Look, Daniel, it works." She twisted in the saddle to show him, and the next thing she knew, she was lying flat on her back in the dirt, and he was looking down at her. "I forgot to say, don't turn around in the saddle too fast," he said. His mouth twitched. "Are you laughing at me, Daniel Roscoe?" Rachel didn't know whether to smile or cry. "You can't call yourself a horseback rider until you've fallen off at least once," he chuckled. "Now that's done. We'll make a proper ranch woman out of you." He grasped her hands and pulled her up. "I'm not sure I want to be a proper ranch woman if it entails getting bruises where they've no business being." Rachel rubbed her elbow, which had taken the brunt of her fall. "Are you sore?" Daniel's expression immediately changed from amused to worried. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't mean for you to get hurt." He placed his hands on her shoulders, and his blue-eyed gaze bored into her, making her breath catch in her throat. "It's nothing, honestly. It was my own fault for getting overconfident." Rachel shrugged, feeling flustered by how close they were standing. Daniel reached up and tucked a stray lock of her hair behind her ear. "There's something on my mind that I've been meaning to tell you," he said softly. "What is it?" Rachel's heart beat faster as she looked up at his chiseled jaw beneath the stubble, and she felt the emotion pulse between them. It's about Tom," Daniel said. "I just wanted to say thank you for taking such good care of him." He stepped back again, looking worried. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have held on to you like that. It's not gentlemanly. I expect you'll want to get back inside now. Ma swears by a hot bath after falling off a horse. It will help ease the bruises." Rachel nodded as confusing emotions swept over her. Part of her had hoped Daniel would kiss her, but the other part was scared that if she disappointed him in some way, she would lose the job and her place in the Roscoe family, and she knew she didn't want that to happen. "Of course. Thank you for the lesson. I expect Tom will need feeding soon anyway." She hurried away. "I'll give you another lesson soon," Daniel called after her. He frowned as he fought the urge to run after her and tell her she was the most wonderful woman he'd ever met, busying himself instead with leading the mare back to the barn for some hay. "Are you going to tell her how you really feel?" Irvin was in the shadows, leaning on his pitchfork. "I don't know what you mean." Daniel loosened the cinch to slip the saddle off, and the mare shook, sending dust motes into the air. "Well, I can see it, and Ma can too. You like her, Daniel. So where's the harm in telling her?" "I don't want to risk it," he muttered. "So you're not denying it?" Irvin jabbed his fork into a pile of hay and flicked it up into the feed rack. Daniel gave his brother a resigned look and shook his head. "Have you forgotten what happened with Jean? It's better to have Rachel's friendship and her help with Tom than spoil it all by telling her I have feelings for her. Besides, she told me straight that she isn't looking for a husband." "That was then," Irvin said, slapping Daniel on his shoulder. "Things can change, brother. Don't waste an opportunity to be happy just because of what Jean did. That's all in the past." "Since when were you so knowledgeable about matters of the heart?" Daniel's tone was friendly, but there was an undercurrent of warning that he didn't want Irvin meddling in his business. Irvin sighed. "If someone looked at me the way I've seen Rachel look at you, I'd be on my horse and galloping straight to the pasture to book a wedding, Daniel. I've been too busy with the ranch and looking after Ma while you were away. But maybe if you're determined not to tell Rachel you like her, I might try my chances instead." "Don't even think about it," Daniel growled. Irvin laughed and shook his head. "I'd never do that to you. Don't worry. I just wanted you to admit how you feel." He grinned good-naturedly. "Now you've managed to admit it to yourself. Perhaps you should tell Rachel too, huh?" Chapter 8. The late spring weather was unseasonably warm, and Rachel saw Daniel wiping his brow as he walked back from the barn. She had been having riding lessons for several weeks already and was making good progress. In fact, she almost regretted that she hadn't fallen off again since that first lesson. The idea of being back in Daniel's arms again filled her dreams. But he had been careful to maintain a gentlemanly distance from her ever since, much to her disappointment. "Would you like me to cut your hair?" Rachel had brought the spare crib out onto the veranda and was just about to settle Tom in it. "You look pretty warm," she added, suddenly feeling shy. "Thank you. I've wanted to ask for days, but I didn't like adding to your work." Daniel ran his hand through his thick mop of hair, and it stuck up in tufts, making Rachel laugh. "Irvin said I was starting to look like a shaggy bear," he added with a wry smile. "It's no bother. You'll feel much cooler once it's done." She pulled scissors and a comb from her apron pocket with a flourish. "I figured you'd say yes. Tom's looking more settled today." Daniel put his hat on the table and stood next to Rachel, looking down at him in the crook of her arm. "If you look just here, you'll see he's about to cut his first tooth." Rachel pulled a funny face, which made Tom giggle, and as he did so, she pointed to the mark on his gum. "He's been chewing a lot, which will help it come through." She pulled another face, and Tom giggled again. The sound was infectious, and Daniel laughed with him. Standing there together, Daniel could almost imagine they were a couple, and it took all his strength not to put his arm around her shoulders. "Are you ready?" Rachel turned toward him, blushing slightly under the intensity of his gaze. "Ready?" "For me to cut your hair." "Oh, sure, sorry, I was just enjoying seeing Tom and you." Daniel knew he sounded like he was stuttering, but he was finding it hard to marshal his thoughts. Standing close to Rachel had a habit of making him feel that way. "He's a lovely baby," Rachel said softly. "You make a good father." Daniel looked down at Tom again, and his heart swelled with love. "It's thanks to you, Rachel," he said. "I was worried I wouldn't be able to cope before you came here, but seeing how you are with him makes me feel like anything is possible. I know it's unconventional, me adopting him, but hopefully one day he'll have a ma to call his own too." Rachel felt the blood rising up her cheeks and hastily turned to put Tom in his crib so Daniel wouldn't see. It was the first time he had ever spoken in such a way, and she wondered whether he meant her or another woman. As Rachel snipped at Daniel's thick, sandy-colored hair, taming it into something tidier, she was finding it hard to concentrate. Even though he was talking chattily about ranch matters, the air between them crackled with a new sense of intimacy, and she saw him shiver slightly when her fingers brushed the back of his neck. That should be enough. The last lock of hair fell onto the wooden boards next to her dress, and Rachel slipped the comb and scissors back into her apron. She picked up the broom, which was leaning by the door, and quickly whisked the hair away while Daniel stood up, ruffled his fingers over his head, and brushed his shoulders to get the last few loose hairs off him. "Thank you, that feels much better." Rachel put the broom back and looked out across the ranch. The nearest paddocks were awash with spring flowers that looked almost translucent in the setting sun. "It's so beautiful," she said. "I'm very grateful our paths crossed. I could happily stay here forever. Tell her how you feel." Irvin's words came back to Daniel in a rush, and he felt his heart thudding in his chest. He had prayed for guidance every day since their conversation in the barn, seeking God's counsel on what to do. He looked across the ranch his parents had created from nothing and felt a sense of how they were all part of the Lord's bigger plan. Had it really been a coincidence that the sheriff had told him to get a housekeeper just as Rachel had found herself in need of a home? A breeze rippled through the grass, and the sun's soft rays made Rachel's curls shine like burnished copper. Suddenly, he knew he couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Would you really consider staying here forever?" he asked. Something about the seriousness of his tone made Rachel turn toward him. "Sorry, it was just a turn of phrase. I guess I was thinking out loud." Daniel stepped closer to her and gently took her hands in his. "I have a confession." He took a deep breath, knowing that once the words were said, there was no going back. He looked into her green eyes, trying to gauge her reaction, and took courage from the flare of hope he saw in them. "Yes. What is it?" "My feelings toward you have changed," Daniel said quietly. "When I first asked you to come and be our housekeeper and help us care for Tom, my stubborn pride was still making me hanker after Joan." Rachel nodded. "I expect returning to Rocky River brought a lot of memories back. It's only natural some of them would be about her. The thing is, I can see now that I was over her a long time ago, but I just didn't admit it to myself. It was only when I saw how well you settled into our way of life that I realized Jean was never really the right woman for me. She wouldn't have been happy here, not like you. You've all made me and Kendra feel very welcome." Rachel smiled up at him. Daniel brushed his thumb over the back of her hand and then gave her a long look. "I know you said you weren't looking for a husband, Rachel, and I want to honor your wish, but I also have to tell you that I've fallen in love with you." His words came out in a rush, and he watched her closely, hoping not to see shock or anger in her eyes. You love me?" Rachel repeated, almost to herself. She hesitated for a moment, and then her face lit up with a smile that melted Daniel's heart. "I've prayed every day for God's help over this. I kept telling myself I shouldn't hope for anything more than just being your housekeeper, Daniel. To consider anything else felt disloyal to Kendra's pa, but my heart kept leading me toward you. You're not cross or disappointed? I'm meant to be your employer, and I don't want to jeopardize our friendship, but I have to be honest and say I want more, Rachel. I want us to be a proper couple, caring for Tom and Kendra together." "I want that too," Rachel replied. "I've fallen in love with you, Daniel. I can't deny it, but I was afraid you might not feel the same way." Daniel pulled Rachel closer and brushed a kiss on her lips that set all her senses alight. "Just knowing that you feel the same way is enough for me. Would you do me the honor of—" Before he could finish his sentence, a sudden commotion on the drive leading to the ranch interrupted them, intruding on the tender moment. A horse and wagon was coming toward them fast enough to kick up a cloud of dust, and a moment later, the horse skidded to a halt in front of them. A thick-set man jumped down, followed by a buxom woman wearing a gaudy red dress and bonnet. "Are you Daniel Roscoe?" The man's question was loud, and it woke Tom up. Rachel hurried to the crib to try and settle him back to sleep. "Yes, I'm Mr. Roscoe. Who are you?" "I'm Leon Kramer." The man swaggered up the steps, not waiting to be invited, and stuck his arm out to shake hands. "This here is Faye, my new wife." "Uh-huh." Daniel regarded their visitors warily. "So, how can I help? Are you lost?" Leon shook his head and chuckled. "Quite the opposite. I'm exactly where I need to be." He stepped sideways and strolled toward the crib, leaning over to peer at Tom. Rachel felt an unexpected protective urge rise up within her, and she darted a look at Daniel, who was by her side in 3 long strides. "Is it him?" Faye asked Leon. She gave Rachel a smile that didn't reach her eyes, but Rachel noticed she didn't look at Tom. "Uh-huh, that's him," Daniel frowned. "Do you want to tell me why you're talking about my boy like this?" "Your boy?" Leon gave a mirthless chuckle. "He's not your boy, Mr. Roscoe. This here is my son, and we've come to take him back." Rachel gasped and saw the blood drain from Daniel's face. She felt as though she had been punched in the stomach. "It's common knowledge in Rocky River that the baby was abandoned, and you decided to keep him tucked away here on your ranch to try and pass him off as your own child," Leon continued. "It wasn't like that," Daniel said hotly. "But he's not your child, so you have no legal right to him," Faye said. She tucked her hand in Leon's arm and gave him a doting look. "My poor Leon was heartbroken when he found out his only son had been abandoned." Rachel's heart sank as she saw the conflicted emotions chasing across Daniel's face. He was honest and kind, which meant she knew he would never want to deny a man his child, but he also adored Tom as if he were his own flesh and blood. Leon's face was impassive, and he suddenly tried to scoop Tom up from the crib. Rachel could tell instantly that he was unused to handling a baby, and Tom's face crumpled and turned red as he started crying at the unexpected roughness of Leon's grasp. Leon released Tom suddenly and stepped back with a tut of annoyance, which only made Tom cry louder. "You don't pick a baby up like that," Rachel snapped. "You have to support his head." She gently lifted Tom and rocked him in her arms until his sobs eased a little. "I never agreed you could touch him," Daniel growled. "What proof do you have that Tom is your son? You could be anyone for all we know." "I shouldn't have to provide proof. You only have to look at him to see that he has the same colored hair as me and chin shape. It's as plain as day he's mine." He turned his head sideways to show his profile as if that was the end of the matter. "That's not enough." Daniel tried to keep his voice calm so Tom wouldn't get upset again. "Tell them about his ma," Faye whispered. A crafty look came over Leon's face. "My late wife, the boy's ma, had a scar on her cheek, right about here." He drew a line across his own cheek with a stubby finger, watching Daniel's reaction. Suddenly, he laughed triumphantly. "See, I knew it. You met her, didn't you? I can see it in your face." "I did," Daniel said reluctantly. "I tried to help the poor woman." "She was beyond helping," Leon said contemptuously. "She was a bad woman through and through, which is why she ran away. What sort of mother abandons her own baby, huh?" "She deserves whatever she got, and I deserve to have my son back, Mr. Roscoe." "Wait," Rachel cried. She hugged Tom to her chest defensively. "If he's your son, why haven't you looked for him before? Something about your story doesn't add up." Leon scowled. "Rubbish. It's because it's taken me this long to find out what happened is all." "Well, you'll have to wait a little bit longer," Daniel said firmly. He strode to the cabin door and pulled his hunting rifle out, holding it loosely in his hand. "I'm not handing Tom over to a complete stranger, whoever you claim to be. I want to make a few checks of my own first. Come back in 2 days, and then, if you are who you say you are, you can have him with my blessing." "What sort of checks?" Faye demanded. "Don't you trust us? You've waited this long. 2 more days won't make much difference." Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle, making his meaning clear. "I'm tied to working on the ranch, and all my family lives here, so it's not as though I'm going to run away with him. Let me make my inquiries. If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to fear." Leon's fists clenched by his side, but then he nodded curtly. 2 days, and then I'll be back for my son." He grabbed Faye and bundled her back toward the wagon. "If you steal him away from me again, this won't be the end of it, Mr. Roscoe. Do you understand?" Rachel and Daniel stood side by side on the veranda, watching until the very last moment they saw the wagon disappear from their view. "He can't just take him, Daniel," Rachel said as soon as Leon had finally gone. Tears filled her eyes, and he took her in his arms, holding her and Tom in a protective embrace. "What's happened? Who were those people?" Eve looked alarmed as she hurried across the yard toward them with Irvin and Kendra. "We were helping Irvin in the paddock and saw them. Why have they upset Rachel?" Daniel sighed heavily. "The day I dreaded has finally arrived. That man, Leon Kramer, claims he's Tom's real father. He spoke badly about his wife's character and didn't show a shred of pity that she died. He wants to take Tom away from us." Rachel hastily dried her eyes just as Kendra's filled with tears. "Are you saying we're going to lose Tom, Ma? That's not fair. We love him, and he belongs here." Eve gave Kendra a hug to comfort her. "Can he do that?" She looked at Daniel, and her expression was full of regret. "I guess it was always a risk." Daniel's voice hardened, and he shook his head again. There was something about him, though. He wasn't really interested in Tom. Neither was Faye, the woman with him, his new wife, apparently. "I agree," Rachel said, nodding. "He didn't act like a real father would act. Something's not right. But why would he want Tom if he's not his pa? And Faye didn't even look at Tom. What sort of ma would she make to him?" Daniel scratched his head, and his gaze softened as he looked down at Tom's cherubic face. The little boy's eyelashes were still spangled with tears, but he gurgled happily up at him and Rachel. "All I can do is speak to Sheriff Jackson and ask if anyone knows who this Leon Kramer really is. I'll go into town first thing in the morning." "Don't antagonize Leon if you see him in Rocky River," Rachel said urgently. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you." Eve and Irvin exchanged glances and shared a brief smile, pleased to see that Daniel and Rachel had finally admitted their true feelings to each other. "I think we all need to get a good night's rest now, don't you? Kendra, you can help me prepare dinner while your ma and Daniel make plans." "Do you want me to come with you to see the sheriff?" Irvin asked. He gazed down the track, looking as though he'd like to ride into town that very moment. "Or maybe I could ask around about this man too?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I'd rather you stayed here. I saw wolf tracks again this morning. The last thing we need is to lose good animals on top of all this trouble." Rachel sat down heavily on the rocking chair, trying to digest everything that had just happened. The sun was just setting, painting the sky pink, but she barely noticed it. "Must we really give him up?" she asked quietly. "I think I love Tom as much as you. I can't imagine our lives without him." Daniel sat next to her and reached across to take her hand. From his elation about Rachel saying she loved him to the crushing disappointment of Leon's claims, he had never felt so many emotions in one day. He shut his eyes for a moment, and Leon's thick-set frame and swarthy features flashed into his mind. But this time, he sensed something tugging at the edge of his thoughts. He opened his eyes again and turned to Rachel. "I swear I've seen Leon before. I'm not sure when or where. But now I think about it, there's something familiar about his face." Rachel felt a surge of hope. "We have to find out everything we can about him, Daniel. We're not going to give up Tom without a fight. Not to a man who doesn't love our boy like we do." Chapter 9. Rachel's eyes felt gritty with tiredness as she stoked the range the following morning. The sun was just rising over the mountains, but she had barely slept a wink all night. "Let me make you a coffee before you leave," she said quietly to Daniel when he appeared in the kitchen. He looked exhausted, but there was a nervous energy about him, too, as though he was ready to take on the fight of his life. The room was already filling with the aroma of strong coffee, and she poured a mug of the dark, aromatic brew out for him, as well as putting a plate of bread and butter on the table. "I know you probably don't feel like eating, but you must. It might be a long day." Daniel pulled a chair out and sat briefly as Rachel bustled around the kitchen. "I heard Tom crying during the night," he said. "It's that tooth still trying to come through. He was running a bit of a temperature from it, but he'll be fine. Don't worry. It's perfectly normal." Kendra was the same. She put her hand on Daniel's shoulder for a moment, and he covered it with his hand, giving it a squeeze. Neither of them wanted to bring up Leon's visit again. Talking about him seemed to taint the cozy sanctuary of the homestead, so the room was quiet for a few minutes, save for the crackle of the fire in the hearth and the clock ticking on the dresser. "We'll be thinking of you today," Rachel said softly when it came time for Daniel to leave. She handed him his hat, but he put it on the table and pulled her into his arms. "I know this isn't the time for romance," he said, "but I truly love you, Rachel. I believe the Lord brought us together for a reason. If Leon really is Tom's pa, it would be wrong of me to stand in his way of claiming his son. I've been thinking it's not our place to judge whether Leon would be a good pa. Only God can do that." Rachel nodded, determined not to cry again. "I know. We just want what's best for Tom." Daniel brushed a kiss on her cheek. "Pray for good news. That's all we can do. And let's hope Sheriff Jackson might have some ideas too," Rachel added with a smile. She handed him his hat again. "We'll keep busy here, so don't worry about us. Take as long as you need." Once the thrum of Rudy's hoofbeats faded into the distance, taking Daniel into town, Rachel busied herself with cooking bacon and eggs for the others, trying to keep a semblance of normality to the day. "I'll be gone for a couple of hours checking the cattle in the farthest paddocks," Irvin said a little while later as he mopped up his plate with a crust of bread. "If the fences need mending, it might be longer. Will you be okay here without me?" "We've gotten through worse," Eve said. She gave Rachel a smile and patted her hand. "We're tough, us ranch folk. Usually it's things like floods and snowstorms that are sent to test us, but with a bit of determination and the good Lord on our side, we get through most things. I admire how hard you and Edward must have worked to make a success of all this," Rachel replied, looking around the cozy cabin. "Well, if you and Daniel are to be together, it's important to have a realistic idea of what's involved." Eve's eyes twinkled as she saw Rachel's cheeks flush. "Irvin and I couldn't be happier for you both," she added in a whisper. Kendra didn't know yet, and it didn't seem right to tell her with Leon's threats still hanging over them. "I think I'll take Tom outside in the garden this morning," Rachel said. She was finding it hard to settle Tom, let alone herself, and being outside in the fresh air and sunshine always helped soothe her worries. "He was a bit fractious in the night, huh?" Eve replied. "How about Kendra and I do some baking together while you do more of the weeding? It will take our minds off things while we wait for news from Daniel." Tom gurgled happily as Rachel settled him on one of Eve's old patchwork quilts under the quaking aspen tree at the edge of the vegetable garden. The new leaves rustled in the breeze, which delighted Tom as he gazed up at them. He kicked his legs, and Rachel sat down next to him for a little while to just enjoy the moment. Looking down at the homestead, which was a little way away, she tried to quell the sense of panic about how upset they would all be if Leon did prove to be Tom's pa. She turned to her faith to comfort her, whispering a prayer in the dappled shade of the tree. "Dear Lord, please help Daniel find out the truth about Leon. If he really is Tom's pa, I pray you will help our hearts heal from losing him. I give thanks to you for the blessing he has been in our lives, even for just this short time. We trust in you, Lord, and thank you for your tender mercy. Amen." Rachel felt a sense of peace wash through her and glanced down at Tom, smiling as she realized that he had fallen fast asleep. "Sleep well, little one," she murmured. After he cried for most of the night, she decided the nap was just what he needed and tiptoed away to start pulling weeds. The repetitive action of hoeing between the rows of early vegetables, which were starting to grow, was just what Rachel needed, and she wondered how Daniel was getting on in town. It was fortunate that he knew practically everyone in Rocky River and was well liked. If there was information to be gleaned about Leon, she knew that folks would want to tell it to Daniel, and Sheriff Jackson was helpful by all accounts. The sun was getting warmer by mid-morning, and Rachel took her bonnet off and fanned herself with it. She had long since stopped worrying about whether she might get freckles, especially since Daniel had commented that he thought they suited her. She glanced toward Tom. He was still fast asleep, so she decided she might as well keep going for a bit longer, rather than disturb him. Suddenly, she heard the sound of whinnying near the barns, followed by the drum of hoofbeats. "What's going on?" she muttered. She threw her hoe down and ran out of the garden. All the horses that were usually kept in the corral closest to the barn were galloping across the paddock, kicking up their heels at the unexpected freedom. Eve appeared on the veranda. "Did they manage to open the gate themselves?" she called, tutting. "It's that new colt of Irvin's. He chews the rope sometimes. Leave them out for now. They'll be all right until Irvin gets back, and then we can help him round them up again." Rachel waved to show she'd heard, and Eve headed back into the cabin to continue baking with Kendra. She watched the horses as they settled down to graze the fresh spring grass and wandered closer to make sure they couldn't escape anywhere else. "You're a troublesome one," she said, with a rueful smile as she spotted the colt in the distance. He just swished his tail and carried on nibbling the grass. The mare Eve had given her trotted toward her and snickered. "Howdy, Floss. You wouldn't do that sort of thing, would you?" Rachel reached up to stroke the mare, but stopped in puzzlement as she caught sight of the swinging gate. The rope had been cut clean through with a knife by the look of it, not chewed by Irvin's colt. She looked around, feeling a shiver of alarm. "Who's there?" she shouted. Her words echoed off the barn walls back at her, unanswered. Suddenly she heard Tom's cry. It was the high-pitched wail he gave when he was distressed, and her heart sank. She whirled on her feet and picked up her skirts to run back to the garden. But it was too late. The patchwork quilt was empty, and she could see a figure on a horse galloping away in the distance. "Come back!" she cried. The breeze had picked up, and it snatched her words away. "Please, bring Tom back to us!" She fell to her knees, and hot tears filled her eyes as she realized that it must have been Leon who had let the horses out to cause a distraction, so he could steal Tom from them. Chapter 10. "Are you sure you can manage to ride Floss all the way to town, Ma?" Kendra looked up at Rachel anxiously from next to the horse. "Rachel will be absolutely fine," Eve said reassuringly. She lifted her eyebrows as she looked at Rachel, just to make sure, and Rachel nodded. "Daniel said I was ready to ride across the ranch on my last lesson, so heading into Rocky River isn't so different. I know Floss will look after me." She patted the mare's neck and took a deep breath to relax her hands on the reins, just as Daniel had taught her. "I can't just sit around waiting for Irvin to get back to the homestead, and I'd rather be doing something practical." Eve nodded. After getting over her initial shock at what Leon had done, she had been the first to suggest that Rachel needed to tell Daniel as soon as possible. "Don't worry about us. I can take good care of Kendra while you're gone. Besides, Leon won't dare show his face here again. He's gotten what he wanted." Rachel's mind was a tangled swirl of thoughts as she made the journey into Rocky River. The fact that Leon wasn't prepared to wait 2 days for Daniel to make his inquiries implied that he must have something to hide. What does he want with baby Tom? That was the question she couldn't figure out an answer to. Leon hadn't seemed the slightest bit paternal, and her impression of Faye, from their brief visit, was that she wasn't interested in Tom either. In fact, thinking back, Rachel thought the woman had seemed rather fearful. But was it fear of the Roscoe family? Or Leon? Her head was so taken up with how she would break their awful news to Daniel that Rachel didn't have time to worry about whether she would fall off Floss again. But as it happened, the mare was as good as gold, trotting calmly along the dusty roads and not even flinching when a bird suddenly flew out of a bush across their path. Eve was right. Floss was a solid mare, well-behaved enough for Kendra to learn to ride on her as well. The thought gave Rachel a sudden stab of grief about Tom. Daniel had shared so much about his dreams of raising a son and teaching Tom the ways of the ranch, but now that might never happen. "Rachel, I thought we agreed you were staying home?" The sound of hoofbeats and Daniel's voice snapped Rachel out of her reverie as he headed toward her on Rudy. His brow was furrowed with confusion, and the horse whinnied at recognizing Floss. At the sight of his kind face, Rachel couldn't stop her tears from flowing again. "Leon took Tom from the garden. I feel terrible. He cut the rope on the gate, so all the horses escaped, but we thought it was just that colt misbehaving." Rachel scrubbed a handkerchief over her cheeks and sniffed. Her voice was trembling with emotion. "I never suspected Leon would stoop so low, Daniel. Tom was tired after being awake from teething all night, so I left him to have a nap under the tree. I should have woken him up and taken him with me when I went to check how the horses had gotten out. He was only out of my sight for moments. It's all my fault. Daniel circled his horse to come alongside Rachel and put his arm around her shoulders to comfort her. Hush, my love. It's not your fault. Nobody could have anticipated Leon would make such a brazen move and steal Tom from under our noses. We must go and speak with the sheriff. That's why I came to tell you, rather than wait for you to come home. You did the right thing. Daniel's face darkened. I haven't been able to find anyone who knows who he is. The man's like a ghost. Either that, or he was lying about who he is. What about Sheriff Jackson? Did he have any information to help you? The jailhouse was locked when I called by. They trotted faster as the horses picked up on their sense of urgency. He rarely leaves the place unattended, so I reckon he'll be there by the time we reach town again. Welcome, Daniel, and you must be Rachel. Sheriff Jackson was just unlocking the jailhouse as they hitched their horses out the front. He ushered them in and grabbed 3 battered tin mugs off his deputy's desk. I had to go up the street to the saloon to break up a fight. Coffee? He poured some out and handed them a mug each. Thank you. Rachel took a sip and darted a worried glance toward Daniel. I'm guessing by the look on your faces that this isn't a social call? Baby Tom has been kidnapped, Sheriff Jackson, Rachel blurted out, and it's all my fault. The sheriff held up his hands to slow her down. How about you tell me everything from the start? And call me Grant, please. I've known the Roscoe family for years, and we don't need to be so formal. He smiled to put her at ease. Daniel explained as quickly as he could about Leon's visit to the ranch the previous day. Then Rachel picked up the story, managing not to cry this time as she related the details of how he had deceived her and taken Tom. The sheriff's troubled expression didn't fill her with much hope. I've never heard of anyone around these parts called Leon Kramer, he said, deep in thought. He gave Daniel a sympathetic look. The thing is, if he is Tom's real pa, there's not much you can do. I'm not saying I approve of the way he took him from you, not at all. But it was no secret that the woman gave you Tom to look after, and folks in town know he's not your son in the strictest sense of the word. It's so unfair, though, Rachel cried. We just want what's best for Tom. But the strange thing is that Leon and his fancy woman didn't seem that interested in him, whereas Daniel dotes on him. She sighed with frustration and paced back and forth across the room, her boots tapping on the wooden floor. Is there anything you can do? Daniel tried not to sound desperate, but she could tell how much it had affected him. Tom settles best if he's rocked before bedtime, and there's a special lullaby I like to sing him. It would put our minds at rest if we could just see Leon and tell him what Tom likes. Please, Sheriff, Grant, could you look for him? I can head out with my deputy and make some inquiries, but it might be like looking for a needle in a haystack. We can help. Just tell us what you'd like us to do. Daniel put his mug down, ready to leap into action. Hold on a minute. Jackson lifted his hands up again. I don't want either of you putting yourselves in danger. Who knows what this Leon might do if he feels cornered? You say he's gotten himself a new wife? That might slow him down a bit. She didn't look like the sort of woman who would want to camp out, Rachel said, thinking back to Faye's ruffled red dress and extravagantly decorated bonnet. More likely, she'd want to stay in a boarding house or a room at a saloon. She seemed a little scared of Leon, too. Daniel walked slowly around the room, wondering what else he could suggest. He paused in front of the dog-eared wanted posters, just as he had when Sheriff Jackson had first suggested he should take on a housekeeper to help with Tom. Look, he cried. Didn't I say I recognize Leon from somewhere, Rachel? This is him, I swear. He jabbed his finger at one of the drawings, and she hurried to his side, looking at it with her head tilted slightly to one side. I think you're right. It's Leon. His hair is longer in this picture, but if you ignore that, it's a good likeness. Are you sure about that? Sheriff Jackson came to stand next to them. Leroy Corwell, he said the outlaw's name aloud and slapped Daniel on the shoulder. Of course. The initials of the name he gave you are the same. This is Leroy Corwell, and he called himself Leon Kramer, right? Rachel nodded nervously. What crime is he wanted for? She almost didn't want to know. He's a petty criminal. He bungled holding up a stagecoach and then carried out a string of robberies. It strikes me that he ain't very smart and will try anything to make a fast buck. Daniel breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that some of the other men in the posters were likely to be hardened murderers and gunmen. Maybe he won't even try to get too far away today? He asked hopefully. Tom will be hungry, and they won't want to risk anyone seeing them with a crying baby. Perhaps they'll hide somewhere nearby for the night. Sheriff Jackson nodded. That's what I'm thinking too. He picked up his hat. Leave this with me. I have a couple of places I'd like to try first. But stay in town so you're nearby in case we find him. It could still be that Tom is his son, but he'll be arrested for his other crimes anyway. A noise out the back announced that the sheriff's deputy had returned, so Daniel and Rachel went outside to unhitch their horses. I feel so helpless, Rachel said. And I still don't understand what a petty criminal would want with baby Tom. Daniel looked up and down the street through narrowed eyes, almost as though he was half expecting to see Leon lurking in the shadow. He put his hat on and gave Rachel a soft smile. Sheriff Jackson is good at his job. As much as I want to be out there helping him, if he thinks it's safer for us to let him get on with it, I trust his decision. Shall we go to the Rosebush Inn and wait there? Rachel suggested. She figured it would be better for Daniel to be with friends who would understand why they were on tenterhooks, waiting for news. Good idea. Once they were mounted again and the horses were walking along the dusty street, he shot Rachel a look of gratitude. I don't want you blaming yourself for any of this, all right? The truth is, I've always worried that Tom's real pa might show up one day. I couldn't have gotten through this without you, is all I know. Suzanne and Eli both looked shocked when Daniel explained their situation. You must wait here for as long as it takes, Suzanne said. How are the others coping with it? Kendra must be upset. It's hard for her to understand at her age. Eve is keeping her busy with tidying the linen cupboard and looking after the new puppy. It was only as she said this that Rachel was reminded just how much they had become part of the Roscoe family. Eve had become almost like a mother to her, and Irvin would make a kind-hearted brother-in-law. She pushed the thought away hastily. Daniel hadn't said anything about marriage, and she didn't want to jinx their newly blossoming love. Losing Tom might change his outlook on life completely, for all she knew. How's business? Daniel asked, wanting to change the subject. Are you still getting plenty of guests to stay? Eli grinned. More than ever. If I weren't so pleased to hear that Rachel and Kendra love being out on your ranch, I'd be cursing you for snapping her up and leaving us short-handed, Daniel. We've taken on a new girl, but she's still finding her feet, Suzanne said, lowering her voice. The poor thing was promised marriage, but when she arrived on the stagecoach, her fiancé had already married someone else. Rachel looked around the dining room where Suzanne had brought them to wait. Why don't I do some dusting while I'm here? I wouldn't hear of it. Suzanne chuckled. You always like to be busy, I know, but that wouldn't feel right. The sound of chattering women getting back from a stroll around the town caught Suzanne's attention. I need to prepare dinner for our guests as the cook had to visit her elderly pa today. Will you be all right to wait here? Eli stood up as well. I have to fetch wood for the fire. Will you at least let me serve tea and coffee to your guests? Rachel noticed that several of them were hovering in the doorway of the parlor, discussing whether to retire to their rooms or play cribbage in the parlor. I guess it would be helpful. I may as well chop more wood for you, Eli. I ain't no use sitting here brooding by myself. Daniel hurried after his friend. Rachel was glad to have something to do, to keep her mind off Sheriff Jackson's comment about how looking for Leon and Tom might be like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Leroy, she corrected herself. She poured coffee for a group of 4 ladies, and once she knew they were settled, she bustled back to the dining room with a duster and beeswax polish. Suzanne might have told her not to clean, but there was nothing else to do. Before Rachel had gotten started, the bell on the outer door tinkled to announce a new guest arriving. She patted her hair and hurried along the corridor, effortlessly slipping back into the role Suzanne had taught her. Are you looking for a room, ma'am? For one night or longer? The woman standing in the hallway had her back to Rachel and was examining a painting on the wall. Just one night, please. One of your rooms out the back, if possible, where I won't be seen. She turned around, and the blood drained from her face. Faye? Rachel couldn't keep the shock from her voice. Chapter 11. Faye? Rachel said again. For a moment, she was rooted to the spot in disbelief. But then she sprang forward and slammed the door closed, so Faye couldn't leave. Is Leon with you? She demanded. He stole Tom from us this morning, and the sheriff is looking for him. I don't know what you're talking about, the woman stuttered. She backed away from Rachel, clutching her reticule to her chest. My name isn't Faye, and I don't know anyone called Leon. Rachel sighed with exasperation. Stop pretending, Faye. You came to our ranch not 1 day ago with Leon Kramer, your new husband. Or should I say Leroy Corwell? Faye gasped then, much to Rachel's surprise, ran to her side. Her eyes filled with tears, and she clutched Rachel's hand. I didn't want to do it, but Leroy forced me. You have to believe me. He has a really mean streak when he's angry, and I couldn't say no. The sound of a door slamming made Faye jump, and she eyed the corridor behind them nervously. He doesn't know I'm here, she whispered. He was drinking a bottle of whiskey to celebrate stealing Tom from you and dozed off. I took my chance and ran away. Is Leroy still in Rocky River? Rachel asked urgently. You didn't think to bring Tom with you when you escaped? Faye shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, I didn't dare in case Leroy woke up again. All I wanted to do was get away. I was going to book myself a room, then go visit the sheriff under the cover of darkness to tell him where to find them. It's not right, taking a baby off someone just to make a few dollars. She sniffed sadly. Please don't think badly of me. Rachel looked up to see that Daniel had crept into the hallway and heard every word. He was by her side in a flash. Just tell us where Leroy and Tom are, Faye, and I promise I'll tell the sheriff none of this was your doing. Faye dried her tears. Thank you. He's wanted for robberies, so I hope the sheriff throws him in jail. She took a deep breath and gave them both a tremulous smile. I might be wrong, but I don't think he's Tom's real pa. Last I saw him, he was fast asleep under the big oak tree just beyond the Black Crow Saloon. You'll see his horse hitched there if you go now, and Tom is there too. Without waiting to hear another word, Daniel tore past them and sprinted outside, with Rachel just behind. He unhitched Rudy and vaulted onto his back, kicking his heels so the horse sprang straight into a gallop. Be careful, Rachel called. Her heart was hammering in her chest with fear, but also hope that they might finally get Tom back, safe and sound. The next few minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly as Rachel watched Daniel disappear around the bend in the road. With a reluctant sigh, she turned to go back inside. Suzanne and Eli were in the parlor, keeping a close eye on Faye. How about you tell me a bit more about how you ended up in this situation, Rachel said. She poured 2 cups of tea and took them over to Faye, who kept glancing nervously out of the window. Why are you being so kind to me? Faye muttered. She took a sip of tea, looking racked with guilt. I think you probably got sucked into a bad situation, Rachel replied. She sat quietly, not wanting to force Faye to speak. We're not really married, Faye blurted out as the silence stretched between them. I arrived in Hudsonville a few weeks ago from Philadelphia. I was meant to be marrying a nice gentleman called Frederick, but it turned out he wasn't nice after all. She pulled a face. The only reason I left the East was to get away from my drunken brother. Frederick was just as bad, so I helped myself to a few coins to get the stagecoach to Rocky River and found work in the Black Crow Saloon. Rachel gave her a sympathetic smile. We're not so different, you and I, she said. I came west as a lady's maid, but it turned out there wasn't a position for me at my mistress's house. It wasn't her fault, just a misunderstanding is all. But you didn't get caught up with another scoundrel, Faye said with a rueful smile. I ain't very good at picking men, it seems. Your Mr. Roscoe seems lovely. Rachel blushed at her choice of words. How did you meet Leon? I mean, Leroy? He came into the saloon a few times to play cards and drink. I should have known he was a bad one, but I was feeling lonesome, and he was company for me, I guess. And baby Tom? How did you know he was at the ranch? Faye shifted uncomfortably in her seat and took another sip of tea. Will I go to jail, do you think? She blinked rapidly, as though she was about to cry. Daniel and I can only put in a good word with the sheriff if we know the truth, Rachel said softly. She patted Faye's arm to reassure her. It's not my place to judge you, Faye. It could just as easily have been me falling in with bad company if Suzanne and Eli hadn't introduced me to Daniel and his family. Faye sighed, looking defeated. All I know is that Leon, which is what he said his name was, told me that he'd heard rumors around town about a woman who had recently died and abandoned her baby to a kind-hearted rancher. He boasted that he had an idea to make money from the situation. Rachel shivered, even though it was warm. Knowing that Leroy had planned to deceive them right from the start felt shocking. So he didn't really care who got hurt in the process? Faye shook her head. I learned pretty quickly that he was wanted for robberies, but he's an arrogant sort of man, Rachel. He thinks he can evade the law and just keep moving on. But how would he have made money from taking Tom from us? Was he going to ask for a ransom? No. He said that wealthy folks who can't have a family of their own would probably pay good money to adopt a baby. Faye pulled a face of disgust at the idea. I told him I wanted no part of it, but he said if I didn't, he would send an anonymous letter to the sheriff blaming me for the robberies. Her voice broke as she remembered what he had done. You poor thing? Rachel gave her a pitying look. I sensed that you were afraid of something. He said his plan to take Tom wouldn't work unless I pretended to be his new wife. The sound of voices outside made her jump, and Rachel reassured her that it was just the guests. But you're still not sure whether Tom is actually his son or not? Faye looked apologetic. Leon's told me so many lies. I can't say either way. Perhaps he really did hear rumors about Tom being abandoned, or perhaps Tom's ma was with Leon at one point and managed to escape from him, but found herself with child. All I hope is that you get your baby back, and the sheriff arrests him. I hope so too. Rachel stood up, unable to sit still any longer. Thank you for telling me what you know, Faye. I promise we'll do whatever we can to tell Sheriff Jackson that this was all down to Leroy. She glanced across to see that Suzanne was nodding. Why don't you go check outside and see if Daniel is coming back, she called. I can show Faye to her room and get her settled in. Rachel paced back and forth outside the front of the inn. Other than the occasional wagon rumbling past, it was quiet. The birds chirped in the trees nearby, and she wondered what Eve and Kendra were doing back at the ranch. Suddenly, in the distance, she saw Daniel. He was riding Rudy at a steady walk as though to be extra careful, and Rachel's heart leapt with joy. It could mean only one thing. She picked up her skirts and ran toward him, not caring that her bonnet had fallen off her head and was hanging by its ribbons down her back. The first thing she saw as Daniel got closer was his beaming smile, and then she noticed that there was a bulge under his jacket, and he was using one arm to cradle it. You found Tom! Rachel's joyful cry sent the birds clattering into the sky. Gabriel reined the horse to a halt and swung his leg over the saddle, dismounting carefully. Our boy is safe and well. He opened his jacket, and Tom's cherubic face peeped out, breaking into a gummy smile as he saw Rachel. Praise the Lord. Rachel threw her arms around them both, and her heart swelled with happiness. He's back where he belongs, with his pa. She looked up into Daniel's eyes and saw her own utter relief reflected back at her. The sound of running footsteps caught her attention, and she saw Suzanne and Eli hurrying toward them with Faye in tow. Faye has told me everything, Rachel said hastily as she saw a wary look come over Daniel's face. Leroy is bad news. He threatened her, and the poor woman is terrified of him. A thought suddenly occurred to her. Where is Leroy now? Daniel's smile returned. Sheriff Jackson and I found Leroy just where you'd said, Faye. He was fast asleep with an empty whiskey bottle next to him, and Tom was lying under the tree, perfectly content, thank goodness. He looked down at Tom again, as though he never wanted to let him go. Is Leroy in jail? Faye asked. Her voice trembled with fear. Yes, he is. The sheriff arrested him there and then. He'll be sleeping off the whiskey right now and then hauled before the judge tomorrow for all the robberies, not to mention the small matter of kidnapping a baby. Is he Tom's pa? Rachel hardly dared to ask the question, but had to know. Daniel put his spare arm around her shoulder. No, He's not. Sheriff Jackson managed to get it out of him. Leroy never even met Tom's ma, so I guess we'll never know where she came from. You're Tom's pa, Suzanne said, brushing away her tears of happiness. If love is what counts, I guess I am because I love Tom as if he were my own. Daniel's voice was thick with emotion, and he pulled Rachel a little closer. All that remains is to finish what I started yesterday. Rachel, will you do me the very great honor of being my wife and Tom's ma? Rachel nodded. She melted against Daniel's broad chest, and it felt like coming home. I will, Daniel. I love you and Tom, and I know you will make a wonderful pa to Kendra as well. Faye burst into noisy tears. I'm so happy you have him back with you. If only I could find a gentleman half as nice as you, Mr. Roscoe. Suzanne linked arms with Faye, and they all walked back toward the Rosebush Inn. I can't promise a gentleman for you, Faye, but how about a job? We're looking for a hard-working person to help at the inn. Really? Faye nodded eagerly. I've grown to like Rocky River, so I'd like to stay, but the Black Crow Saloon was too rough for me. Consider yourself employed, Suzanne said, happy to give the woman a second chance after her brush with Leroy's criminal ways. She gave her a wink. You'd be surprised how many gentlemen call in for a cup of coffee and end up meeting a nice young woman to marry. Just like Daniel and Rachel, come to think of it. Are you two heading straight back to the ranch? Eli asked. Daniel smiled. Yes, I think it's time to go home after all that excitement and tell the others our good news. Kendra will be so happy, Rachel said. She couldn't wait to see her daughter again. All we have to do is find Pastor Franklin on the way. Daniel looked deep into Rachel's eyes, and then their lips met in a kiss that set her pulse racing. We have a wedding to book, he murmured softly. Epilogue. I now pronounce you man and wife. Pastor Franklin beamed at Rachel and Daniel and carefully closed his Bible. Thank you for fitting us in at such short notice, Daniel said, shaking his hand. I figured after everything that happened with Tom, you'd appreciate having your wedding sooner rather than later. Rachel had never felt so proud or happy as they walked back out into the sunshine, arm in arm, followed by their friends and family. The breeze sent a shower of pink and white blossom over them, and Daniel reached up to brush it from her gleaming copper curls. You look so pretty, Ma. Kendra skipped happily behind them. That's because it's the most wonderful day, Rachel replied. Tom doesn't seem too troubled by his ordeal with Leroy Corwell. Sheriff Jackson chuckled as Tom waved a chubby fist from where Eve was cradling him. He's a Roscoe through and through. That's why, Eve replied firmly. Are you sure we won't have any more trouble from Leroy? Yes, what's the latest news? Daniel lifted Tom from Eve's arms, and the little boy kicked his legs excitedly, giggling as Kendra picked a flower to show him. Dada, Dada, Tom said, babbling his first words, much to their delight. You'll be pleased to hear that Leroy confessed to all the robberies. It had gotten to the point where he realized he couldn't try and wriggle out of it anymore. The judge sent him to do hard labor in Oregon, and he has to pay back every cent of what he stole. And what about Faye? Rachel's question was quiet, as Faye was standing nearby with Suzanne and Eli. We decided leniency was the best policy for her. Leroy had quite the knack for charming women, it seems. He was more of a con man than a burglar, if anything, and it was always the poor women who came off worst. Daniel nodded approvingly. I'm glad you told us that, Grant. Suzanne says that Faye works hard. Sheriff Jackson put his hat back on. She deserves a fresh start in life, and I'm sure being at the Rosebush Inn will give her that. Look, there's Sarah with Gilbert. Rachel lifted her hand to wave at her old friend, who was hurrying toward her. Congratulations, Sarah cried, giving Rachel a hug, and then Kendra. You look so happy together, and isn't Tom a little darling? I expect you'll be having more children soon, she added, sounding slightly envious. Rachel caught Daniel's eye and blushed slightly, but he just chuckled. That's all in the Lord's hands, he said good-naturedly. For now, we're just thankful for our many blessings. Tom, Kendra, and family and friends to celebrate with us. Will you join us for refreshments? Suzanne has laid on some food for us at the inn. Rachel couldn't help but wonder whether Sarah might be in the family way herself as she shook her head. No, Gilbert isn't feeling too good. He needs to rest up. They walked away, and Rachel hurried after them. Sarah, I just want to say thank you for suggesting I should come to Rocky River with you. It was the best thing that's ever happened for Kendra and me. They hugged goodbye, and Sarah promised to come out to the ranch for a visit soon, as she had never been there. I really feel like this is home now, Rachel said with a happy sigh as she and Daniel followed everyone who was already walking toward the Rosebush Inn. It was a blessed day indeed that Sheriff Jackson suggested I needed a housekeeper. Daniel grinned at the memory. Right from the very first time I saw you, I hoped you'd say yes, he added with a twinkle in his eye. I reckon our friends saw something between us long before we could admit it to ourselves. We have a lot to be thankful for, that's for sure. Daniel stopped for a moment and plucked a sprig of cherry blossom from the nearest tree, tucking it into Rachel's silk shawl. He looked deep into her green eyes and then folded her into an embrace as Tom gurgled between them. I love you, Rachel. You're a wonderful mother to Tom and Kendra, and you make me the happiest man alive. Rachel felt her breath catch in her throat as he kissed her passionately under the blossom. I love you too, Daniel, my dear husband. We have our whole lives ahead of us, and there's nowhere I'd rather be than by your side at the ranch with our children. A breeze rippled through the trees, and the sound of laughter drifted toward them from the inn. It was turning out to be a perfect day, and Rachel silently gave thanks for everything that had brought them together. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler, with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.